Hey, what's up, everybody? It's the Grayzone. We actually made it in time before the results are announced in a few weeks. So we did really well. I don't think we're going to have a winner tonight. I'm Max Blumenthal, in case you didn't know, and I'm here for some serious Canadian election interference in American democracy with Aaron Mate. Welcome to the show.
Good to be here, Max. I have to correct you. We do have a winner, and that's democracy. Because we almost lost our democracy on January 6th, and somehow we've persevered to see this election between these two choices: a con man pretending to be a working class champion, and someone who, like, what can you say about Kamala Harris? Like, what is Kamala Harris about? She's promised joy, and she promised to build a lethal fighting force, and she cackled. And that's my memory of her in this campaign.
Well, then it would be very much like 2016 with the cackling militarist against The Apprentice. We'll get into that. I want to just make a few announcements. We actually should probably have some special guests. You never know if they're going to show up because they're so busy. They're such busy, important people who are some of the most influential influencers in our sphere. But it looks like Brianna Joy Gray will be joining us pretty soon. We do have a agreement from Michael Tracy to join us afterwards. He's just breaking away from the Free Press live stream with Barry Weiss to join us. That's a joke. And Ali Abounim, if he makes it back to Chicago in time, will also join us. And who knows? I don't think I can get – I want Anya Parampil to join us, but she's parenting right now. And she's cooked like an incredible meal for an election night, but like not that many people showed up. It's just not that festive. It's such a bleak choice. She made some of the best macaroni and cheese, like grandma made, except my grandma made kugel. She didn't make mac and cheese. So, but she's incredible.
Well, this is the election reporting that people are tuning in for, because we won't be reporting really from the battlegrounds. We're not going to have, detailed maps, but we can update you on the wonderful festive meal that Anya's cooking on a bleak day, and other fun anecdotes surely throughout the night. And thank you for everyone for being here. You have so many choices tonight as to what you can be, drowning your misery in, and we're honored to do it with you, because that's what we're here for. The Grayzone's here to, not shy away from the bleak. That's certainly not what we do. So let's all at least take it in together.
And someone said they thought I was going to make that Ani was going to make biryani. Well, she is South Asian. Her family's from Kerala. It's not really, I don't know if it's really like the main thing in their palate. They're into like Ayurvedic food. She does cook Indian food very well though too. Yeah, we'll take your comments. I'll try to respond to comments more. We're going to try to follow what's going on. We don't have like some Steve Kornacki character at the big board. What we've done every week is show how both candidates, but the current one for the Democrats, we basically stand at a board and show the Gaza destruction board. That's what they should be doing on these networks. But this is one of the only times when actually the American networks do Vox Pop, talk to regular people. They present this as some great democratic show. But for the rest of the year, what they're doing is actually damaging to the concept of democracy. They have de-educated the American public so much about democracy that voters don't even know what it is. And that happens to be the top issue for voters in exit polls now, Aaron. And what do you think voters, it's like 35% of voters have said democracy is the top issue. Let me see if I can find that report. I mean, it's being hailed as proof that, or some kind of evidence or harbinger of a Kamala Harris victory. Here's MSNBC reporting on this exit poll. It kind of reminds me of the 2004 exit poll when everyone said they voted on values.
Them out. The other big thing, of course, is the gender gap. And I want to say we finally do have these numbers in now on the most important issue. Look at that in bright pink there. 36% of voters say the most important issue to them is the state of democracy, not the economy as the top issue. That is right there at number 2 at 30%, the economy. Abortion, 14%, followed by immigration. Chuck?
Immigration's where? Think about it. Just take a step back here, okay? Look at those top 4 issues again. We know what the number 1 and number 2 issues have been for Donald Trump this election season.
The economy and immigration.
Correct. Add that together, okay? Add up together state of democracy and abortion. I'm being a little simplistic here, but already, if this, and again, one of the things that I want to warn people is that there has been a tradition in these exit polls.
I was just going to say, you're doing it. That's right.
The first wave skews a little left.
And sometimes the top issue can become the second top issue.
And it has happened to us in previous elections. So we absolutely want to, there's a little grains of salt we want to give you
That's
here.
right. We're not overreading into it, but we do want to tell you what we know as
directionally, if this is what this electorate is saying, you would be, and the Harris campaign will be ecstatic that that's the direction right now of where things are at.
So we have another.
So what does that even mean then? I mean, and you can see they're effusing. They're filled with excitement about that number. But what does it mean? What does democracy even mean at this point to the voter? I think the term was sort of redefined during the Russiagate era.
Exactly. This notion that like our pristine democracy was sullied by some Russian memes and bots and some alleged hacked emails that Russia, in fact, did not steal, if you care about the available evidence. And then, of course, January 6th, where it became about Trump interfering with the transfer of power, even though ultimately his scheme got nowhere except for a 3-hour riot on Capitol Hill. But then it became, for Democrats, this thing where we have to protect this managed democracy where the elites select the candidates. Any dissenting candidate like Bernie Sanders is sabotaged by his own party. And that's the democracy, according to the elite conception, we're all supposed to care about, in which issues play zero role in political campaigns. Like, what has been the defining issue in this campaign? There has been the issue of immigration, which Trump is running on. Has Kamala Harris offered any kind of substantive alternative to Trump's vision of like mass deporting immigrants? Not really. She's actually tried to appear tough, or quote unquote tough. No one talks about the sanctions that cause immigrants, the regime change policies that cause immigration. Same thing with the economy, which everyone seems to care about. Like, what are Trump's policies? He wants to increase tariffs. That's one substantive thing. He wants to eliminate taxes for on tips. That's another. But aside from that, like, can you really identify much? The Republicans tried to kill the Affordable Care Act, which, despite being really flawed, is still popular among some people. And Kamala Harris didn't even really make that an issue. I don't even think she really made much of an issue of like their Democrats' like achievements, which include to me like lowering the price of prescription drugs. This was all about like saving this mythical idea of democracy and rallying with people like Liz Cheney, and then coming to the defense of Liz Cheney and misconstruing some Trump comment into like a threat on her life, which of course he didn't do.
A very pithy and salient Trump comment about Liz Cheney being a chicken hawk who sends Americans to die, but she would immediately fold with 9 guns in her face, like those soldiers face. Democracy, what does it mean? Yeah, I think you summed it up pretty well. For some people, it means bureaucracy. It means protecting the deep state, the civil service, as well as the national security bureaucracy that Trump is always threatening. For some people, it just means vibes, and they're vibing with Kamala's final message, which reminds me a lot of Hillary's failed final message in 2016 about love trumps hate. but which is actually much more severe, that Donald Trump is a fascist who is Hitler, and Nazi Germany a new Nazi 1,000-year Reich will take hold if he is elected. And so this is all about democracy. Basically what those voters are saying is if the Democrats don't win, the outcome will be apocalyptic. So I kind of like fantasized about a scenario of a liberal insurrection, a liberal January 6th, because people have been so whipped up into a frenzy by the corporate media, by both campaigns. I think these campaigns and the way elections are conducted are horrible for real democracy, which we're going to talk about in a second with Brianna Joy Gray. But I fantasized about this, and I cooked up this with Anya. We whipped up this AI image of kind of liberal cosplay, Handmaid's Tale insurrection on the Capitol, because no matter what happens, one side is going to delegitimize the other and declare that this election was completely illegitimate unless it was a blowout. And maybe they will blame Jill Stein, Hamas, and the left if Donald Trump somehow wins. Maybe they will blame Brianna Joy Gray directly, and she's here right now. One of the most influential voices of the truly independent left in America. So welcome to the Grayzone. I know you're really busy tonight. I don't get as many.
No, it's my pleasure to be here.
It's like when I was in junior high and like I just didn't, like you were judged by how many bar mitzvah invitations you got. So I guess you got more than me tonight. But I mean, you're in the thick of it. Like you're actually kind of connected to a camp. You're involved in the Jill Stein campaign. Is it fair to say that?
I mean, not in any formal sort of a way, but look, I know it's a sort of a thorny and weird place to be in as someone who sometimes wears a hat that's more akin to journalist or pundit, and then also does opinion news and is very vocal about her analysis of the current political situation. And, I wrestled with it, but at the end of the day, anybody who listens to my podcast knows that we've been on basically a 4-year saga of prodding and probing these arguments about working within the Democratic Party to see if there's any validity to it. I did not come to this in bad faith. But the consequence of that analysis over the last 4 years has been that it is an impossibility. You don't change the Democratic Party changes you. And frankly, my work on the Bernie 2020 campaign is part of what has led me to this conclusion. So for me to pretend like I'm not a supporter of third parties would be to sort of disingenuously hide the ball from the audience. So for me, the only question was really which third party candidate to get behind. And there were a lot of lovely options. I think Claudia de la Cruz is amazing. I was optimistic about Cornel West, particularly when he was partnered with the Green Party. But at the end of the day, Jill Stein was the best fit, in large part because I do believe strongly in trying to build, as difficult as it is, an alternative party in the United States of America that can be a genuine adversarial force against the corporate duopoly.
So what's the theory of change here? Because the Greens in general, and Jill Stein in particular, are getting hammered and accused of assisting in this campaign to elect fascism. And they're also being accused directly by we could even watch one of the attack ads and just get your response to it from the DNC. But they're being accused of basically being astroturfed by the Trump campaign. So yeah, I want to get your response to this ad, and then maybe you can explain what the theory of change is here in light of the Gaza genocide and a looming war with Iran, which obviously has been sponsored by the Democrats and the Biden-Harris administration.
Obviously, Democrats want to leave no stone unturned, and the Democratic National Committee even has this new ad about the danger of the undervote or those who may vote for Jill Stein. Just like 3% of the vote. Take a look.
Jill Stein, Green Party candidate for president. So why are Trump's close allies helping her? Stein was key to Trump's 2016 wins in battleground states. She's not sorry she helped Trump win. That's why a vote for Stein is really a vote for Trump.
Jill Stein, I like her very much. You know why? She takes 100% from them.
I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
Yeah, I think that ad, which by the way is the first time I believe the Democratic Party has ever run a TV ad against a Green Party candidate, is real evidence of how afraid they are of how much the Green Party is eating in to votes that the Democratic Party feels it is entitled to. Look, I think generally speaking, historically speaking, Green Party voters have not been people who were ever going to vote for the Democratic Party, but I think that is really changing, especially when you look at the large number of Muslim and Arab American voters who have said that Jill Stein is their first choice. The CARE poll that came out just a few days ago showed that more Muslim voters choose Jill Stein than are choosing Kamala Harris, about 42% to 40% or something like that. Don't quote me exactly. It's a close margin, but nonetheless, Jill Stein is eked out ahead. And I think panic about what that means in states like Michigan, which have large numbers of Muslim and Arab American voters, is terrifying to the Democratic Party. To be clear, they had a choice. They had a choice to win those voters back by simply agreeing to demands which are shared by overwhelming majorities of the American public, a ceasefire and an arms embargo against Israel. But the Democratic Party chose AIPAC donors. It chose its allegiances to the state of Israel as it commits to genocide over defeating Donald Trump. And if in fact Kamala Harris loses this election, it's because the Democratic Party prioritized Israel over defeating what they say is an existential threat to democracy.
Yeah, Israel, or prioritized pro-Israel donations, pro-Israel donors. Aaron, I don't know if you want to jump in here.
Yeah, Bree, great to see you. It's been a while.
You too. I know it has been a while.
You were part of the 2020 Bernie Sanders campaign, which, you know, many people consider sort of like the zenith of the left. If you it's hard to remember now, but those days before the primary really kicked off, I remember a lot of us thought, I mean, me included, that he was going to win, which was, you know, I can't think of in my lifetime, a time of more excitement being on the left. And obviously that didn't pan out, and it's been steadily downhill ever since. And I'm just curious now, as someone who's on that campaign and who now is facing such a backlash from other people on the left for your stance, which has been, you know, the Democrats should be punished for their role in facilitating the genocide, and your open support for Jill Stein. What are your thoughts right now on the state of the left and its future?
So first, I just want to say that it's not just that the Democratic Party should be punished. I do think that there needs to be a moral accounting, but, you know, I'm not God, and that's really not my role. I do think, though, it's deeply dangerous for Democrats to have been told by Democrat-aligned groups like Uncommitted, to have been told by breakaway groups like Abandon Biden and then Abandon Harris, that votes could be earned if they took a popular approach, which is to say not continue to arm and facilitate a genocide. They did not move an inch. Some on the left have pretended like Kamala has softer language or that her tone is modulating in ways that are meaningful, but there has been absolutely no difference between Kamala Harris's policy and Joe Biden's policy on this issue. So for there to have been months and months before the election, a clear warning from the electorate that they needed to change their policy in order to win. If the Democratic Party, having ignored those warnings, still does win, my concern is that the Democratic Party will have an unprecedented mandate to commit genocide. They will have been given a mandate to commit genocide, and to know that there are absolutely no consequences at the voting booth or anywhere else for their actions. And what that means for the future of this country and the future of the world puts ice in my veins. But to the core of your question about Bernie Sanders and 2020 being the sort of zenith of the left, for me, I think a lot of people who were really invested in the Bernie campaign, it was that campaign in the 2016 campaign that really proved to us that working from within the Democratic Party was a fool's errand. Realistically speaking, you're not going to get a candidate like Bernie again in terms of someone who had such high popularity, a long career in Congress, kind of professional political bona fides. a record that was strong, that he could run on, that was largely unimpeachable, not completely unimpeachable, but largely so. And that who benefited from an organic groundswell in 2016 that he didn't even anticipate. Coming back prepared in 2020, having bested almost everyone in the Democratic primary, and then to face the coordinated dropping out of centrist candidates so they could consolidate behind Joe Biden after Super Tuesday. I mean, that was evidence of just the beginning, I think, of how far the Democratic Party is willing to go to make sure that someone like Bernie Sanders is never within a stone's throw of the White House.
Yeah, it was the beginning of a slow motion coup, which we've seen play out through the coronation of Kamala, who was, obviously a creation of the media in some of the same ways Donald Trump was, except that Trump actually had to win hard-fought elections. This is the first real election she's had to actually win. And, there's the same sense of entitlement that Hillary had, which is why there's this attack on the Green Party. We were talking about democracy, this concept of democracy, and how this is, many voters are saying the state of democracy is what they're voting on. What does this independent candidacy represent, or how does it reflect the state of American democracy? What kind of suppression are you seeing out there with Green Party candidates and other independent candidates? And what kind of treatment are you getting from the Democratic Party and DNC's sort of outsourced influencers on social media and elsewhere?
Look, the suppression has been incredible. The Green Party has to spend millions of dollars that it doesn't really have to try to defeat legal attacks from the Democratic Party to kick it off the ballot. It is experiencing mismanagement and interference from state Democratic parties, like as we're seeing in Ohio, where they've played these shenanigans with deadlines on when you can announce your VP, making separate rules for the Green Party than they've instituted for the Democratic Party, which also didn't choose its presidential candidate, much less vice presidential candidate, till after the deadline date. But the Green Party has been kicked off the ballot, and at various precincts, folks have reported signs saying that your Jill Stein Green Party vote won't count, which the Green Party is contesting in court. Moreover, we have seen attempts to interfere with independent journalists, specifically independent Black journalists. 2 radio hosts were fired earlier this year after it came out that the Democratic Party fed them questions. And Tavis Smiley, a renowned radio host, recently sat down with me for an interview on Bad Faith Podcast and went into detail about how he received Oppo research from a senior person in the Democratic Party, including questions that they were sent to him before he sat down with Jill Stein just a couple of weeks ago. He immediately told Jill Stein and on camera read the questions and exposed that this was going on. The other 2 radio hosts went along with the program, and when their station found out about it, it was a violation of their codes of conduct, and they got fired for journalistic malpractice. So there's really no ends too far for the Democratic Party to go to try to make sure that we don't live in a democracy, that they have full control over who voters even know is running for this race. I mean, as a very secondary matter, I have come under a lot of focus, I think in part because, look, there's always shaming when you move outside of the Democratic Party, but I think it's relatively rare for people, not that I'm of any real renown, but the backlash is so strong that I think most people would rather avoid it. We saw what happened to people like Susan Sarandon, who's been, by all accounts, blacklisted from many quarters in Hollywood. People have been dropped by their agents for advocating for Palestine. It's a real dog-eat-dog world out there. And if you've gone through it once, a lot of people just don't really
dropped by creative artists. She was dropped by Creative Artists Agency.
That's right. That's right. So my feeling is that, as frustrating as it is sometimes, as difficult as it is sometimes, and as much as, frankly, for my own kind of professional kind of shielding and professional kind of neutrality, I would prefer not to maybe take on this role. I do feel like it's a sort of an obligation, as long as it's out there. Journalists all over the place talk about who they're going to vote for, but for some reason it's supposed to be uniquely stigmatizing if you're voting Green. I think that normalizing the that normal people who have earned the trust and respect, at least in some quarters of the internet and some quarters of the left, are very openly making this political choice, is creating a permission structure for others to realize that they don't have to be stuck in the corporate plantation of the Democratic Party. I went out and made my own Green Party hats. I've been walking around in them in the city. I've been trying to really resist the stigma that is around not voting blue no matter who. And I think the reason is simple. I don't just feel like the Democratic Party needs to be punished. I feel like the Democratic Party is absolutely part and parcel of the Ratchet effect. Without the Democratic Party, we wouldn't have the consistent moving to the right. And if you genuinely want to stop the rightward shift of this country, I think that you have to at least make an attempt to create an independent political structure that will have the opposite effect of the Ratchet effect, to pull the country back to the left instead of voting lesser of two evils in a way that guarantees that the next conservative candidate, the next conservative nominee, is going to be to Donald Trump's right. There's no counterbalance unless we start to fight now today for a political alternative.
But what do you make of the argument? This is the counter argument to this. And there was a recent video that was put out by people who, identify with what they call the left, the radical left organizers, saying that, electoral politics is not about our own preferences, our own values. It's about setting the conditions under which we wish to organize. And we'd rather organize against our weakest opponent, which in this case is Kamala Harris, versus someone like Trump, who will make it harder to organize and will be impossible to sway because he's on the right and they won't care at all what we say on the left, whereas we have a chance of moving someone like Kamala Harris. And certainly we have a chance of organizing better under a Kamala Harris than we do under someone like Trump.
That's like the criminal in Hannibal, throwing down a baster and some seasoning to the captive victim in the hole and saying, season yourself up real nice and maybe you'll have a better chance of escape. It's absurd. What kind of organizing have we seen under Joe Biden? Why do we talk about this as though the entire context of the Gaza genocide hasn't happened under a Democratic administration? Did we see pussy hats and people in the streets when Joe Biden was president? We had the largest protest movement in American history in 2020 in the BLM protest. And when Joe Biden became the nominee, everyone was told they had to sublimate their deeply held feelings about a man being killed on camera in front of our eyes to dutifully go and vote for the guy who says we needed to fund the police harder, the man who wrote the crime bill. And police killings unjustified police killings have only gone up under the Biden administration. At a certain point, there has to be an acknowledgement that while some things are in fact worse under Republican presidents, some things get worse under Democratic presidents. I like to say sometimes that it takes a Democrat. It takes a Democrat to neuter the welfare state like Bill Clinton did, to start the war on crime like Bill Clinton did. And there are many people more historically grounded and smarter than I am who have pointed out that there's a good argument that Richard Nixon was a more progressive candidate than many of our contemporary Democratic politicians that we've had during our lifetime. You have Kamala Harris bear hugging the Cheneys, running around trying to castigate Jill Stein in these attack ads while she just received an endorsement from Richard Spencer. The point is that we have two conservative parties here, and I will not be preached to about lesser of two evils when the lesser evil is beyond my wildest dreams of anything that I would ever consider voting for in a negative way, obviously.
Yeah, I was always wondering what happened to Richard Spencer.
Well, he's Team Harris.
Remember, he was like in 2016, he was getting like cover stories on Mother Jones. They're like the handsome former college quarterback who's now the face of Nazism. And then he just dropped off the face of the map. And now he's back. He started out as a kind of centrist Republican who would hang out at AEI and the think tanks, and word on the street is he dated a lot of prominent female neoconservative journalists who will not be named now, Julia Ioffe and David Duke. This whole thing of him endorsing Jill Stein was the most predictable thing ever. He endorsed me when my book Goliath became a threat to the neocons. he actually didn't. It was like a semi-positive review that says I wasn't anti-Semitic enough on his site. And they said but like Christopher Hitchens wrote a piece about how David Duke endorsed Cindy Sheehan because he praised her when she was doing her protest outside Bush's ranch in Crawford, Texas. David Duke was jailed for fleecing his followers out of hundreds of thousands of dollars. And when he came out of prison, he was broke. And then suddenly he starts endorsing all these people who are mainly on the left, who are threats to the establishment. I mean, put 2 and 2 together. And what's Richard Spencer doing? It all raises a lot of questions about hijinks here. You also talked about suppression. I heard a Green Party candidate was kicked off the ballot in Ohio after a forged signature was submitted to the Secretary of State, stating that they no longer wish to run and that the Green Party is still lobbying the Secretary of State and trying to prove that was a forgery. The Democrats have tried to force Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to remain on the ballot in states. This is crazy election interference. And by the way, I appreciated your cannibalism metaphor, but Kamala has just announced free lotion to anyone who takes the hose.
I did that a little bit for Aaron. I know how much you and Katie like to talk about cannibals, sharks. What was it? Some other useful idiot is in this weird topics. Usually something about genitals.
That's not me. That's not me.
You guys are my
I appreciate
favorite.
it nonetheless. Yeah.
I would have invited Katie, but she was taken. But, we have a good, we have a good J positive blood chemistry when we're on screen together. Speaking of co-optation, though, being co-opted by the Democrats, and hopefully we'll be able to get Ali Abunimah in the studio virtually to talk about this, but you were commenting on this, Bree. U.S. election 2024, this is Middle East Eye. Uncommitted movement splits after taking money from PAC supporting Harris. It's $400,000 from a PAC that basically mandates recipients to not support third-party presidential candidates. The Uncommitted National Movement, for the few of you who don't know, was a grassroots effort to mount a protest against Kamala Harris or Joe Biden against Biden in the Democratic primaries, got 100,000 uncommitted votes in Michigan on the basis of protesting the Gaza genocide. So it really registered an impact in the primaries, but then suddenly it forms into this kind of national movement. Professional Democratic consultants like Abbas Alawieh, who ran a lot of the Squad campaigns. I'd always see him as the body man for AOC on her shadow on Capitol Hill, and Waleed Shahid, who was involved in the Bernie campaigns, took over. And then all this money comes in from the Democrats, and suddenly they basically endorse Kamala Harris and create this split within the movement. Now you have abandoned Harris. What are your thoughts here? And Aaron, feel free to offer your own opinion.
Yeah, look, as I understand it, this is a developing story. I've had people DM me saying that they were inside the movement and that basically the initial reporting is true, that they feel very betrayed by the realization that the organization was foreclosed basically after taking the money from ever making an alternative endorsement other than Kamala Harris. Other people have tweeted that they were never going to make any kind of endorsement, that it wasn't the money that was precluding them, but their own statement, which they then deleted and then revised, seemed to admit as much. So I am open to hearing more. I don't know if Aaron knows any more details that have emerged over the course of the last, few hours or so. But I think that the fundamental point is this: the impression that wasn't in any way rebutted was that Uncommitted was an organization that had could deliver votes if certain conditions were met. And that was lobbying to use that leverage to influence Kamala Harris's politics toward Israel. The recognition that the worst they could do is not affirmatively endorse her dramatically cuts into how much leverage they actually had. And that does feel like a betrayal for a lot of people, especially when you look at the enormous volume of money that was involved in that bargain.
I agree that they are, worthy of criticism because they undermine their own leverage. The whole point of being uncommitted is that you're not going to commit for the candidate unless they meet your demands, and obviously they failed on that. I'm just uncomfortable with the level of vitriol directed at them I see from some people online. So I don't know how much this translates to other areas, because I do think they did something positive at first. By the initial uncommitted campaign during the primary, I think was really positive. It showed that the Biden team could not count on the votes of people who care about genocide, and it did put it on the table. And the fact that they got tens of thousands of people to vote uncommitted, I think, sent a very powerful statement. I think they made, personally, I wish they hadn't made the choice at the end to effectively endorse Harris, even though they said they weren't endorsing Harris. They actually tried to endorse Harris, from what I heard, but the Harris campaign declined their endorsement.
Yeah,
that's what I heard.
And they wouldn't even let him have a vetted speech, and then they engaged in this undignified display of like sitting down outside the DNC.
Well, the sit-in I didn't mind because that brought public attention to this issue, and even though they
did it outside where it would be least disruptive because they didn't want to piss off the Democrats. I mean, it was obvious at that point.
I sort of agree
insiders.
They're
trying to work within the party. It's not me, but I don't want to. That's who they are, and so I do believe in the inside-outside game. It's not the inside game, not for me, but I don't want to disparage people who choose that route. Where I agree with both of you is that they undermine their own leverage by effectively endorsing Kamala Harris anyway, and I thought that took away the whole point of their campaign. Them receiving money, I don't have a problem with unless people can show it's used for corrupt reasons. Because
I think the question is, if they hadn't received the money, could they have made an alternative endorsement? And the initial sort of post that they made seemed to suggest suggested as much, that it was perhaps, it seems like quite obvious that there were a number of different opinions within the group. Some people from uncommitted obviously fractured off and went to abandon Biden and abandon Harris. So it's difficult to paint them all with a broad brush, but it does, I think, raise the question of what uncommitted might have been or what it might have turned into under the name uncommitted that was getting so much publicity if it had had more flexibility to make different kinds of political moves. Like, how much was the splintering a consequence of the organization having these commitments that were as a consequence of having taken the Democratic PAC funding?
Okay, well, their counter argument there is that the PAC that they got the money from has given money to groups that do endorse third parties, like, for example, CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations.
They endorse third parties?
That's what uncommitted claims.
CARE is like in the tank for the Democrats. Like they were. I mean, they're
CARE, I don't know about that.
CARE praised John McCain after he died. Like CARE is, not going to align with the third parties. And then you have the Abandon Harris campaign, partly because the mainline Muslim groups are trying to get in the tank for the Democrats. So it's like a coalition of Muslims who actually want to meaningfully protest the Gaza genocide, and the Greens and Kshama Savant. But just one quick point, and I don't want to get so deep in the weeds here that we're like, debating uncommitted fringe, not fringe, but like something that would seem boutique to a lot of people all night. Yeah. But the uncommitted movement members, the grassroots members, are the ones who are outraged about this. They're the ones who are like bringing the pain to the national movement online and sharing photos of one of the leads on a luxury vacation on the Amalfi Coast right now, spreading. There's whispers about Waleed Shahid getting a White House job, possibly. That this is all taking place against the backdrop of a genocide where people in Gaza and people's family members who are grassroots members of this group are actually starving in northern Gaza. So it's very personal, and I think that this really represents a split.
Yeah, it does feel like the spirit of it reminds me of what was the story years ago when AOC, some of the money that she had raised went to a Democratic PAC, and people felt like even if this is sort of the normal course of action for Democratic electeds, it seemed out of step with the idea of her having this adversarial relationship with the Democratic Party. There was so much sympathy toward her for being kind of beat up by Nancy Pelosi on the House floor. for having an insurgent campaign, all the dismissiveness that came the way of the squad in those early couple of years, it felt like a betrayal, even if it was kind of par for the course. And this has the same sort of a feel to me, that even if there wasn't technical wrongdoing, the idea that a group that held itself out as having leverage because it could withhold its votes was never going to withhold its votes meaningfully from the Democratic Party makes the whole thing feel empty and performative. And I agree with you, Aaron,
opportunistic.
I agree with you, Aaron, that like while it was happening, while the DNC protests were happening, I was a little skeptical. But ultimately, when the Democratic Party treated them so poorly, despite them being so obsequious, frankly, I thought it was a really good demonstration of how poorly the Democratic Party cares at all about Arab voters. And it was a good lesson for the world at large, precisely because they were so sort of well-behaved, good little soldiers at that event. Now, what happens after that is a different sort of a story, and how certain members, I think, of the uncommitted movement have consistently chosen to, I would argue, run cover for the Democratic Party in the month since, I think is a different story. I recently did a radar, I'm calling them debriefs now, over on my new Substack, in which I point out how John Oliver had Rura Roman on his show as a way to sort of launder people's desire to vote for Kamala Harris. Of course, you can vote for Kamala Harris as a lesser of two evilism if you want, but the using her as a sort of cover. See, this Muslim voter is going to vote for Kamala. It can't be that bad. You don't have to be sort of pro-genocide to do this. Felt really icky. And so many other Palestinian and other Arab Americans seem to feel as though that was a sort of betrayal of the overall interest.
Here's my question about them. Did they do more harm than good? I just don't think so. I don't think so.
Maybe not. Is that the right question, Aaron?
Well, that's the question I'm posing. I don't know.
You had to be in Chicago.
That's not the right question, but
you had to be in Chicago to see it. They were a part of the reason that the protests in Chicago were minimal, and the ranks of the protests winnowed out to the independent socialist parties. They were a key reason.
Why?
Why the Democrats?
Why is that they're doing?
What's that?
Why is that they're doing that the protests were small?
Because they were affiliated with organizations that told people to not disrupt the convention and to participate in a quote unquote inside outside strategy, along with a lot of the major Muslim American organizations, which bussed people to the first major protest in DC, but they didn't show up because they're like, well, Kamala might win and we don't want to piss her off. We want our people on the inside.
Right.
I see Michael Tracy's in the green room, but Brianna, go ahead with I kind of cut you off.
Oh no, I was going to say I have to run anyway. I've got another show to do, so Michael's welcome to come in if he's up next. But just to say that I think the question I would ask is, was there more potential for leverage than they were able to exploit because of the choices that were made? Not did they do more good than harm, or less harm than good. I think that's a kind of a version of this almost lesser of two evil argument that is used to manufacture consent for Democrats. I think ultimately when you're dealing with the crisis as exigent and overwhelming as what's happening in Gaza, to not do everything in your power as someone in the relative safety of the United States of America to put pressure on the political party that is executing a genocide is a dereliction of your responsibility, both political and moral. I think that's the argument that I would make if that turns out to be the case. But again, I look forward to seeing more reporting out on what actually happened. And if anyone is involved is watching, I'd be happy to interview you and talk to you over on Bad Faith as well.
Well, Bree, we really appreciate you taking the time to join us. This is a big get for us, as they say. So thank you so much.
It's a pleasure, guys. All right, take care.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for your voice. Thanks for sticking to your guns over the past year or so.
Right back at the two of you. I honestly don't know where this whole media space would be without the real reporting that the two of you do and the real courage that both of you have shown. So thank you.
Appreciate you.
All right.
Well, that was the Brianna Joy Grayzone hour or half hour. That was a good collaboration. I liked it. We should do that more often, but we don't really cover electoral politics that often. This has basically been the war report since October 7th. One of our favorite roving reporters, though, who's been out there in the swing states, in the battleground swing states, covering the most important election of our lifetimes ever, is Michael Tracy, and he's here with us now. Where are you? You're somewhere in the Keystone State.
I am in beautiful Chester County, Pennsylvania. Come one, come all. Every asshole with a political agenda of some kind has flooded into the state. So my deepest sympathies are with actual Pennsylvanians who have to endure this insanity. I mean, I've never seen more political propaganda flooded into a single jurisdiction. It's actually incredible. I know there's obviously been huge amounts of ads aired and mailers sent and canvassers dispatched to badger people in previous elections, but this seems like above and beyond what it has been in the past. By the way, have we saved democracy yet? Have we found out?
We haven't found out yet. A few typical states are coming in. I feel like you would have a better sense of that.
Yeah. So, I mean, if people actually care about I know electoral politics is sort of uncool, but I don't know. I'm incorrigible, so I kind of follow it obsessively since I'm like 16. The thing that's notable is that so Trump won Florida by like 13 points. Now, Florida could be an outlier because of just in migration, meaning people who are generally conservative have been moving to Florida.
White migrants.
Are they all white? I don't know. There might be some beautiful shades of different colors in there.
Native or American citizens moving from
intra-country migration, another right term.
Like you got
in migration, from within different states, from other states, yes, and so that could be like a double-edged sword potentially for Republicans, because if you're getting you don't get any electoral college benefit if you win Florida by 13 points versus 1 point, right? So are there people coming from other states that are maybe lessening the margin for Republicans elsewhere? Seems possible to me. Obviously, it puts Florida laughably outside the reach of Democrats in the foreseeable future. But I don't know. Yeah, so that's notable to me. And then that my favorite candidate of this cycle, Mark Robinson, the gubernatorial candidate in North Carolina, he's lost decisively. So
Martin Luther King on steroids.
Yeah, I think isn't that what Trump called him?
Trump called him MLK, Martin Luther King on steroids.
And he's just like some wild man.
I have a roid rage so big.
And he's just he's just some maniac that they're like a local Republican chapter in North Carolina recruited by scanning crazy Facebook posts, I guess. Like that's the method for Republican candidate recruitment. He ended up as lieutenant governor, so there you have it. But he got wiped out. So I don't know if that could maybe have some relationship to the presidential race. Looks like Kamala is going to lose Georgia, but she could possibly win North Carolina.
Oh, Georgia. There's some news out of Georgia, which, has led to some possibly like decisive voter suppression. I don't even know if you can call it voter suppression.
Suppression of whom?
This is the FBI. The FBI is aware of bomb threats to polling locations in several states, many of which appear to originate from Russian email domains. None of the threats have been determined to be credible thus far, but 4 polling locations in DeKalb County, which is a Democratic stronghold, were shut down as a result of these bomb threats.
Well, I don't know about you guys, but
I'm not laughing at the bomb threat, but I am laughing at the attribution to Russia, which is, I'm sorry, is too on the nose.
I don't know about you guys, but I plan on taking that totally at face value.
They're non-credible threats, but we should just assume that they are from Russian emails. Like no one could possibly fake a Russian email address.
Yeah, and if they did come from a Russian email, that's all the more reason to not see them as credible, because if they're coming from Russia, it's not as if the Russians are like manning like remote controlled bombs from Russia. So, but the thing is, I don't believe actually. I just reflexively don't believe anything that's blamed on Russia at this point.
Yeah. So I have a bone to pick with you, Max. I'm going to demand that you take accountability for something because this has been bugging me interminably. So I was out talking to voters at polling places, and lo and behold, I talked to a guy probably in his late 20s in, where was it? Quarryville, Pennsylvania, which is in like Amish country.
I wasn't Amish. Where this is going.
And I, what I do is I very politely and amiably go up to people and ask them if they'd like to discuss who they voted for as they're exiting the polling place. And you'd be surprised, a fair number of people do want to discuss it. Some people just give me the side eye or whatever and walk away. But one guy talked to me very happily, and he said that he had voted for Trump. He hadn't voted for Trump in the prior 2 elections, but he voted for Trump in part because this time around he is highly reassured because Trump is bringing in Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to the administration. Now, for the longest time, I was berated by endless internet commenters for expressing even the mildest skepticism of this bullshit Kennedy hagiography that underpinned his entire presidential run, and then his fake, first his fake Democratic primary candidacy, and then his fake independent candidacy. Because while he was claiming to be running to dismantle the quote-unquote duopoly and lashing into both Donald Trump and Joe Biden, turned out it was actually a Republican proxy campaign, and then he funneled all his ill-gotten gains from that fake campaign into one prong of the duopoly, and now it has been running around for weeks telling people like this voter who I physically encountered and who voted for Trump because of it, that Trump is going to, this is a direct quote, make peace with the world, while on the other hand, Trump runs around demanding that Israel bomb Iran's nuclear facilities, calls Benjamin Netanyahu on the phone and congratulates him on invading Lebanon, after Jared Kushner first put out the public endorsement on behalf of the Trump operation for Netanyahu to go ahead, because of course, as we know, Israel calibrates. So my point is, like, my beef is, and I was sort of exaggerating, it's not a particular beef with you, but like, do you think, should I still think that I'm crazy for having been suspicious of this whole RFK boondoggle from the outset, given how he's now legitimizing Trump in the eyes of misinformed voters as somebody who's going to make peace with the world, and it seems to maybe have had an electoral impact that benefits Trump. So tell me where I'm wrong. Let
me answer quickly first, Mike. The only area where I think you erred in this, which I was critical of you of, is I never felt as if you did RFK Jr. And I never felt as if you like, you were right, obviously, about RFK Jr. But I never.
All right, let's end it there. I'm logging off. I'm logging off.
But I never got why you wouldn't give him credit in areas where he was right and where he stood apart. Like he was calling for pardoning Julian Assange, and on the Ukraine proxy war, he was very sensible.
His critique was the most articulate of any candidate.
Yeah. And you, Mike Tracy, I mean, since you raised this issue, you never gave him any credit for that, and that's where I thought your argument was flawed. But in terms of him turning out to be a surrogate for Trump, and also him turning, I mean, more importantly to me, him turning out to be a fanatic supporter of Israel, palling around with Rabbi Shmuley and being to the right of Joe Biden and Donald Trump when it comes to Israel, that to me was unforgivable and disqualifying. And in that respect, you calling him out as not being a principled person, I think you were totally right, and you deserve credit for that. But my question to you is, before Max answers this, like, I mean, do you think it's fair to say that you never like what do you think of my critique that you didn't give him credit where actually he was good and better than the other alternatives?
Because he had no record. I'm not impressed. He had no record to compare and contrast with his rhetoric.
But he had positions.
So if you're telling me, well, hold on a second. Yeah. I'm not impressed that somebody can copy and paste a Douglas McGregor Facebook post and then just regurgitate it out, and then he gets some online plaudits from people who just like want to hear stuff regurgitated back to them. I don't find it impressive. You know,
I prefer someone who's listening to.
Why should I find it impressive? Why should I find that impressive when 2 years prior, roughly, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was, for example, a hardcore Russiagator, denouncing the Republican Party for not being sufficiently McCarthyist, to use his term, in investigating Trump's collusive ties with Russia. This is a guy in like his late 60s. I'm supposed to be impressed that like he can't hold together a coherent belief for any extended period of time because his last name is just so impressive. And because he was like an environmental lawyer, really? I mean, he's the only environmental lawyer in the country. And it's just like a coincidence that he happens to have gotten this massive ill-gotten profile. No, I mean, I just think that you have to have more meat to the bones if I'm supposed to be totally credulous about the stuff that you spout. And so, no, I didn't give him quote credit on that because like people can go and just say anything. And if it's not actually tethered to a substantive, record, then yes, I'm going to express skepticism, especially when the entire foundation of his campaign was clearly a fraud. I mean, it was bolstered by this bogus Kennedy mythology, this fake version of history that undergirded everything he was doing.
Okay. The main argument you had with anyone in our sphere was with Anya, who can't join the stream now because she's being a parent. But she tells me that she already tweeted out in public that you were right about RFK. This was after the kosher butt plug salesman Shmuley took control over RFK Jr.'s, with Miriam Adelson in the background. I called him out. I challenged him to a debate discussion on Jimmy Dore. He refused. We did
a stream fact checking him. We did a stream fact checking.
And a whole stream fact checking him on here and on Jimmy Dore. So I feel like I'm being a little bit. Anya told you you were right in the beginning, but I just don't want to make this whole thing about RFK.
No, we don't have to make it. I wanted to get that off my chest.
Okay,
one little final point on that, okay, and then we can really move on.
All right, make it a quick final point.
Quick final point is leaving aside Ukraine, leaving aside Israel, leaving aside his quote unquote policy positions, anything that were never connected to any substantive record. How about the fact that he undercut and screwed over the third-party independent movement that he claimed he was galvanizing for 8 months, and then just funneled all the resources into the Republican Party?
Fair enough.
Yeah, I interviewed minor party candidates whose nomination he sought for president, who he then he clearly just swindled, and he gets all these like flattering and ass-kissing, coverage from the alternate media sphere. So I mean, anyway, we can move on because I know this is an obsession.
We never promoted him on here. In fact, the only engagement we had with him was I went on his podcast once to talk about Ukraine, and at that time, this is before he went. Oh, Max, like you did his podcast too.
On Ukraine.
There we go. Yeah. So this is before he went nuts on Israel, or at least publicly nuts, like that I had seen. And that was at a time when people cared about the Ukraine war. People don't anymore. So that was the extent of our engagement with him. We never promoted him here. And so.
And what about the fact that he's deceiving the electorate on behalf? Yeah,
fair enough. I agree with you. I agree.
Okay. Good. So we all agree. Sure. Perfect.
Yeah. There was never any argument here to the contrary on that. But
I'm trying to keep it moving and.
Yeah, let's keep
we
it
rarely talk about domestic politics at a granular level, but there are so many. You were bringing up Mark Robinson, who got ensnared in an internet sexual perversion scandal. He had like Black Hitler profile on a porn site, and he immediately scrubbed the profile after it got exposed by CNN. Then you've got this guy who's, I guess he got his clock cleaned in North Carolina, refused to drop out after that. But you got this guy who's arguably an even like a much bigger sleazebag, and is like Marco Rubio Part 2, Bernie Moreno in Ohio. Mm-hmm. There's some serious slime bags running in this election. This is from Mo Chachik's profile of Bernie Moreno for the American Prospect. And about how he's running against Sherrod Brown and he's winning, which could also be a harbinger of a Trump victory in Ohio, which helps pave a path for Trump's victory. And the Sherrod Brown campaign has avoided going at Bernie Moreno the same way that the Democrats went at Mark Robinson. And so here's what Mo Chachik writes. the Brown campaign has steered clear of dragging Moreno's soon-to-be ex-son-in-law, Max Miller, who's a congressman, into attack ads, even though the young real estate scion's 2022 marriage to Moreno's daughter, Emily, at Trump's Bedminster Golf Club appears to have sealed the MAGA endorsement for his Senate campaign. Miller was one of the former president's favorite aides, despite or perhaps because of his lifelong penchant for violent outbursts and misogynistic insults. While working in the White House, Miller dated a fellow staffer who later accused him of physical abuse. An in-depth Politico profile published a month before the wedding detailed multiple episodes of him violently assaulting women. And over the summer, Emily accused him of abusing drugs and threatening her safety, and moved with their infant daughter out of the house they had shared into another house Miller accuses the Moreno family of having purchased secretly for her. Somehow the only campaign that makes any mention of the sordid tale is an online commercial produced by Dennis Kucinich, who's running against Miller in a long shot campaign in suburban Cleveland. We probably should have invited him on. I mean, Aaron, feel free to shoot Dennis a last minute invitation. And, we learn about Moreno having a profile, which he claims was the result of a hack on a dating site where he's supposedly seeking men. And he's running a, overtly kind of homophobic campaign in Ohio. This guy is a Colombian who says that he's not related to someone named Bernie Moreno in Colombia, who's tied to cartels. And he takes the same kind of fanatically anti-communist regime change positions across Latin America as Marco Rubio. So this is someone who's about to be a MAGA star in the Senate.
And Donald Trump endorsed him in the Republican primary. I mean, that's why he's potentially about to win his Senate seat, because Donald Trump has such unprecedented domination of the Republican Party that he literally picks and chooses who wins congressional primaries, particularly in Ohio, where all he has to do is rattle off a single Truth Social post, and basically you're assured the Republican nomination. So, yeah, I mean, that's all Trump. I mean, so to the extent that this guy is now going to get valorized as a MAGA superstar, that all flows directly from Trump's personal involvement in this race. Max Miller is also a giant zealot on Israel. He did get married at the Bedminster, New Jersey Golf Club, despite not being from New Jersey. It's just, I guess, they picked out the venue from a catalog, and it seemed really appealing. And yeah, they had, I think they had an Orthodox Jewish wedding at Trump's estate. And this guy Miller is one of the most fervent Israel hawks in the entire House of Representatives. So now we have like a family clan essentially being empowered under the aegis of Trump. So yeah, there you have it. I don't know if Sherrod Brown is necessarily guaranteed to lose, but doesn't look particularly good. And he would have to really defy political gravity, I think, to win despite Trump, coming in with a 10-point margin at this point.
Yeah. And tons of crypto money behind Moreno. You've been like, the last time we spoke together, it was at Icarus Fest, and you were just hammering Trump as this complete fraud, and like you're really out to piss MAGA off. I don't know if that's because a lot of them followed you because you started mocking resistance liberals when Trump was president, like Aaron did. Aaron got like, it was like a beloved figure on some levels, with like bridging the gap between the left and MAGA, because he just ran a buzzsaw through the Russiagate narrative. It wasn't anything he invited. And now I see, your tweets, you're infuriating them, but it seems like what you're saying about a next Trump administration is something anyone who's anti-war, including people who are America first, should be really worried about. I mean, here's Mike Pompeo. This is something you tweeted from Trump's last campaign rally in Pittsburgh.
And I often get asked, Mike, what was it like? Right, the Washington Post described me as the most loyal cabinet member to Donald J. Trump. I had to remind the president that they did not mean that as a compliment. They asked me, what was it like to serve for President Trump? And I told them, and I've told everyone hundreds of times in these 3.5 years, it was the greatest privilege that Mike Pompeo could ever have. I was proud to be a part of President Trump's team. I talked to him every day for 4 years, first as CIA director and then as Secretary of State. And what I was so proud of is that we understood the greatness of this nation, and we never once apologized for the United States of America. Not once.
So,
Wait,
yeah.
play the rest of that, because he says the key thing right toward the end there.
Okay.
Always a not a good sign when someone refers to himself in the third person. You know, it was the greatest honor that Mike Pompeo ever had.
Yeah, that might be a side effect of Ozempic.
Now, President Trump's going to secure our southern border. We will bring peace back to the world. We will take down the ring of fire. We will support our friends in Israel, but he's going to need help to do that.
So he's saying,
go
ahead.
So the ring of fire is a reference to the axis of resistance and their strategy of surrounding Israel in a quote ring of fire.
Yeah, you know, one thing that I've been, again, maybe I'm just of a unusual disposition, so I'm easily aggravated, but I now get accused of having, quote, TDS, Trump Derangement Syndrome, because I guess there has been a slightly more of an emphasis as of late by me on the contradictions within the Trump movement, the Republican movement. You know, Trump has unprecedented unilateral control over one of the two major political parties. So this seems like a sensible thing to do. He's the three-time nominee of the Republican Party. Again, doesn't have any precedent in recent U.S. history. His influence is just enormous, and he might be on the verge of becoming president again. And yeah, I've been baffled, maybe not baffled, but dismayed by what I think is a totally missing rational critique of Trump. Because if the ordinary voter is just absorbing the predominant critiques of Trump out there in the ether, what they hear is liberals taking offense to his wisecracks, or claiming that they're so outraged by a joke at a rally, or screaming racism, screaming January 6th, and on and on and on. And they're not actually exposed to the rational critique. And I think that's kind of bolstered a new segment of the Trump support base who are just not aware of what he did in office, because it's never amplified within any like reasonable sectors of society, right? It's very unusual. So, like, for example, and Max, I remember talking to you about this. Like, I felt like I was pulling my hair out because Trump was absolutely critical in facilitating the passage of the largest ever disbursement of Ukraine war funding back in April. He worked hand in glove with the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, and his emissaries in the Senate, Lindsey Graham, Mark Wayne Mullen, Kevin Cramer. I have people who participated in this on the record that Trump's political license was actually critical. So, I mean, so the reason why people accuse me of having TDS is because I feel like there's a totally missing critique out there that should be more widely known and is nowhere to be found. So, yeah.
Just one thing. Mitch McConnell personally thanked Trump for the passage of the Ukraine funding.
Yes.
That's how instrumental Trump was to that. And, you've pointed out that actually, for example, Liz Cheney, despite this image we have where it's like Liz Cheney versus Donald Trump and they're like diametrically opposed, that policy-wise, Liz Cheney stood with Trump most of the time because Trump actually carried out most of her priorities. And so, my thoughts on what accounts for this is basically they don't like Trump, not for really policy reasons, but because he's too much of a loudmouth. He puts a bad face on the global empire. You're not supposed to say things like, we're in Syria to take the oil, which is what Trump said. You're supposed to say, we're there to spread democracy and fight terrorism. And that's what this comes down to. It's a branding thing, not a policy thing. And you pointed this out when you talk to his Trump supporters, there's this widespread belief that he's always being duped by his own aides, right? He's always being conned, and he just, he didn't know that, Julian Assange was being persecuted under his watch, even though that was his Attorney General, William Barr. And he's always like the helpless victim of the deep state within his own ranks. He never has any agency. And the reality is he has no convictions. He has no policies. And to the extent he has convictions, he's never willing to, dispense any political capital or energy to actually push them through. So, for example, when he ordered U.S. troops out of Syria, he was just ignored, and he stood down. He didn't make an issue out of it.
Quick update before Michael chimes in. The New York Times Needle has Donald Trump at a 68% chance of victory. Looks like Trump's going to take Georgia and North Carolina, and Virginia is leaning to Kamala Harris. The population of Northern Virginia and Richmond continues to grow, so that bring people coming in for tech jobs, and that's no surprise. Pennsylvania remains a toss-up along with Michigan and Wisconsin, but we don't expect many numbers from Michigan and Wisconsin for at least another hour. So, Michael, you were saying?
Yeah, on the Liz Cheney point, this has been very annoying as well because, Trump, I think, shrewdly identified Liz Cheney as a convenient foil because obviously the Kamala Harris campaign elevated her. She was a central focus in the Democrats' closing message, amazingly enough. And it's still bizarre to even say that, but it's true. And Trump kind of latched onto that adroitly with a political astuteness. I mean, that Trump, if Trump has, I don't think anybody can deny that Trump has a good political antenna, right? That's what got him who he is. And so he starts bashing Liz Cheney and saying she's a warmonger and making this contrast between the two of them as though they were eternal ideological enemies. But in reality, Liz Cheney was one of Trump's most stalwart defenders when Trump was in office. It didn't take me that long to dig up clips of Trump praising Dick Cheney while he was in office, saying he's a tremendous supporter, and heaping praise on Liz for doing his bidding in the House of Representatives on Israel policy and Iran policy, even on Russia. I mean, Liz Cheney cheered the abrogation of the INF treaty, for example. And to add to the irony, it's not only that they were in total sync, or they were largely in sync when he was president. The one area where they did at least have a surface level disagreement was over Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Liz Cheney introduced an amendment to the 2021 National Defense Authorization Act that would have somewhat bureaucratically stymied Trump's ability to withdraw from Afghanistan, which he claimed that he wanted to do. He could still ultimately have been able to do it, but she was trying to throw up obstacles. And of course, she had the assistance from the Democrats on the House Armed Services Committee, who were all in favor of making it more difficult for Trump to withdraw from Afghanistan. But now, fast forward 4 years later, Trump has retroactively adopted Liz Cheney's position on Afghanistan. Trump goes around saying that he was never going to withdraw. The Pompeo-Trump Taliban agreement that called for the complete withdrawal of all U.S. troops from Afghanistan, from all remaining bases, Trump now said he was never going to fulfill, and it was moot, and he was going to keep a permanent occupation force in Afghanistan at Bagram Air Base, and then the ancillary combat missions that would necessarily require, because he says it's close to China's nuclear arsenal, and he wants a permanent U.S. troop presence there to, I guess, antagonize or intimidate China. And he retroactively adopted Liz Cheney's position. So not only were they partners when he was governing, but now he's actually more in league with the Liz Cheney foreign policy paradigm than he was when he was president on this issue. And yet the popular depiction is that they have this fierce conflict between them. And it's kabuki theater. It's like WWF style feuding.
Well,
there's no underlying policy content to it.
Ideologically, they might not, but it seems like the strength of the Donald Trump campaign is taking hated figures and turning them into foils. He's done that with Adam Schiff. He's done that with Hillary. He did it with Hillary Clinton. And, when he wins so strongly in Florida, more than he did in 2020. Yeah, there were some major advantages that Joe Biden had in 2020 where he could campaign from his basement because of the whole COVID event, the mail-in ballots. It wasn't really an in-person campaign. And now it's a campaign where Donald Trump has the strength of outperforming his rival at rallies. But I feel like a lot of Trump voters are just voting on the basis of their hatred for what modern liberalism is, and on the specific figures that Trump picks out as his foils. And in many cases, they are truly detestable people. I mean, I was listening. One of the greatest, truest things that Donald Trump ever said was Adam Shit, referring to Adam Schiff. And I was listening to his rally last night on C-SPAN, and he was just going off for 5 minutes straight about how Adam Schiff's neck is 4 inches wide, but his head is like a giant watermelon, and that his head is going to fall off his neck. And it was all like Adam Schiff's physical attributes. And I mean, most people in America don't seem to know who he is, but within Trump's movement, they just hate him, and they were going wild about it. Then Megyn Kelly comes on, and she's going off about Doug Emhoff and how he beats women. That's what the whole rally was about. And so I think part of the reason that Trump did so well in Florida is because of the amount, because of their ability to expose how detestable these people truly are. It doesn't matter if he's ideologically opposed to Liz Cheney and that he himself is a man of peace and she's a chicken hawk or not. It's that there are many Americans who recognize these people to be detestable. And then Kamala's she'll say Trump is a fascist, but you don't have these colorful caricatures of all of the people that liberals hate. She's saying we just need to get over the division. People don't want to get over the division. People want to feast on the division and destroy those they culturally despise. And I don't think people are that interested in policy, even when the economy should be a top issue and many people are suffering. I think, that's what this is about. The Cheney family, like, what kind of a crazy own goal is that on Kamala's part to not only campaign with Liz Cheney and praise Dick Cheney, but then in one of your final statements to descend from the tarmac and deliver a statement to the press claiming Liz Cheney is being threatened by Trump and mentioning her again and again and again, when any American with any connection to the Iraq war hates her. So I think it's effective strategy for Donald Trump. And
he certainly exploited that. He campaigns as the president of peace. He's, launched an appeal to Muslims in Michigan by pointing out all the carnage that the Cheneys caused in the Middle East. And
as he did with the Bushes, and he destroyed the Bush family in 2016. So I think what Liz Cheney is trying to do here is she saw from the January 6th committee an opportunity to ingratiate herself with the national security establishment that was embedded that had embedded himself in the post-2016 Democratic Party, and that this would allow her, while her father is still alive, to save his good name and bring him back into the limelight, because she felt so bad about him being denigrated and called a war criminal and a con artist. So for her, it was about her family. The Democrats gave her that opportunity. And if Trump wins, I think one major reason will be that the Democrats decided to let the Cheneys back into the fold.
And what made it easier to let the Cheneys back in the fold is after 2016 embracing Russiagate, which centered on neocon dogma. This idea that Trump's call for having better ties with Russia was treasonous. And the biggest exponents of that message were neocons. And that totally cemented their place that was already there at the top of the Democratic Party. And they've only gone further to the right since with the Ukraine proxy war, which I think wouldn't have happened if not for, well, actually, I shouldn't say it wouldn't have happened, but certainly it was fueled by Russiagate. And there's been no reckoning for that. And also no reckoning with like the condescending attitude that Russiagate underscored, where the attitude among liberal elites, and this was broadcast across the media, was that millions of people who voted for Trump and not for Hillary were duped by the Russians. And so that people are so malleable that they can be fooled by dumb memes that nobody actually saw. And to pursue that goal, they also weaponized the government. They did weaponize the Justice Department, the intelligence agencies, to undermine an elected president based on a ridiculous allegation that he was a Russian agent. And people don't forget that. People don't forget that an elected president, wherever you think of him, was undermined and investigated on totally baseless grounds. And that continued after he left office with all these different cases. Some of them, I think, had some merit, but a lot of them didn't. Like the case in New York, Michael, I mean, you covered this, like the campaign finance case, which was just ridiculous. And I think that served to Trump's advantage because it cemented his self-image as like a anti-establishment figure targeted by the powers that be.
So we've got Ali Abunimah coming on in about 5 minutes. Michael, definitely want to get your response to that. But, also in closing, like since you've been on the ground, what do you think is going to happen? I don't know if the results will even be announced tonight, and why do you see it going that way? What's your crystal ball?
So you would hope that someone somewhere would deign to point out that while Trump is claiming to have this deep ideological conflict with Liz Cheney, he is simultaneously parading around with Mike Pompeo. I mean, I was at the Reading, Pennsylvania rally that he held yesterday afternoon, where he called out to Pompeo and had him stand up for applause. And also in the entourage was Tom Cotton and Marco Rubio. Okay, so if those are the people around Trump, what is the meaningful policy distinction between that cadre and Liz Cheney? Nobody can really explain that. And nobody cares to identify that as a contradiction, but I think it would be illuminating because, in talking to voters today, I do have to say that the emptiness of the Democratic message, I think, is going to be a decisive factor if things trend the way that they seem to be going right now and Kamala is defeated. Because, like, when I talk to, like, the most hardline Democratic voters and ask them why it is they voted for Kamala today, they'll, like, one woman was telling me she was voting against fascism and racism. Another woman told me that she was voting for, like, the lesser of two evils. Another woman who I just spoke to said, I'm voting for Kamala Harris because I'm a woman and that's my only option. So those are like the bundle of issues that the Democrats have elevated as the central appeals that they're making to voters. And that's not going to resonate with like a 25-year-old guy who's like skeptical of the system and doesn't hear anything that is actually relating to his interests at all. And when I talk to the Trump voters, I have to say that more often than the Democratic voters, they'll cite real issues. Like the final guy that I talked to tonight in Oxford, Pennsylvania, I went up to him, said, did you vote tonight? She said, yeah, voted for Trump. What's your reasoning? He said, I'm basically sick and tired of the Democrats sending money to Ukraine when this should be spent here. The Democrats have completely forfeited that issue to the Republicans. Now, Trump is not almost certainly not the person who's going to fulfill or is going to address that grievance. He's the one who started arming Ukraine in the first place. He facilitated that giant $100 billion national security supplemental. He just bragged recently that the way he apparently prevented Putin from invading Ukraine under his own tenure was that he threatened Putin directly, personally, that he would bomb Moscow and also bomb Putin's private living quarters. So, like, none of this really aligns with the policy record of the Trump administration, nor what he could plausibly do when he's president. He claims to have a secret plan to end Ukraine. But the point is, politically, the Democrats have totally forfeited a giant range of resonant issues to Trump in favor of these abstractions around combating racism and January 6th. Actually, sorry, one guy I was surprised, mildly, a Democratic Kamala voter, asked him, why did you vote for Kamala? He said, because how dare any presidential candidate sit idly by and watch January 6th happen? So these are the kind of things that, like, the Democrats, like the committed Democratic voters are ingesting and citing as their rationale for voting for Kamala, whereas the Republicans have much more tangible and concrete issues. Like a lady told me, I'm on Social Security benefits. My standard of living has deteriorated under the Biden administration, and I'm voting for Trump because my recollection is that it was better 4 years ago. Is some of that probably nostalgia and rose-colored glasses? Sure. But still, there are legitimate issues to, like, wage a political campaign on. And the Democrats have basically abdicated any claim to be a realistic alternative on that set of issues. So, I'm not surprised that the hollowness and the shallowness of their campaign could end up yielding a Trump victory. And it's a shame that I think, rational, prudent, and necessary critique of Trump hasn't been made, and people haven't been exposed to it, because he could well be governing for another 4 years.
I always said that, they can't make a critique about him being like a rich guy who doesn't actually care and who like abandoned his people on January 6th because they're controlled by the rich. They hang out with the rich. They are the rich. And they can't attack him for being a warmonger who assassinates people around the globe because they're constructing the most lethal fighting force in human history. They are the party of the national security state. But I think a lot of young people who've never experienced any of the economic miracles like the bubble economy of the 1990s that I grew up in, what they think is no president is really going to deliver anything material for me. So it'd be just fun to have someone who's kind of a troll in there, who's giving a finger to the establishment. I watched CNN interview a 25-year-old woman in like Reading, Pennsylvania, and she said she was voting for Trump, and she said, he'll maybe do something good for the economy. And then they said, you could see the reporter so alarmed, and she's kind of shaking, like, how could a young woman not want to have a ton of abortions under Kamala, and she said, are you offended by Trump? And she said, no, I watch Family Guy and The Simpsons, and they talk about every race on those shows. And, if you can't laugh in this life, you're going to go crazy.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, that's a pretty good case for Trump. Like, he's going to be a lot funnier than Kamala.
Yeah, actually, I had a guy, a 19-year-old first-time voter, tell me that one of his primary reasons for voting for Trump was because he finds him funny, which I did too. I mean, that's one of Trump's great geniuses. He actually is amusing. He's funnier than the stupid stand-up comedians they had at the Madison Square Garden rally. But how about this, Max? Final point, okay? Itamar Ben-Gvir, the genuinely fanatical, messianic government minister in Israel, was so passionate about the need to endorse Donald Trump that he broke with ministerial code and came out and publicly endorsed Trump. Have the Democrats been able to do anything with that? Of course not.
Of course
so
not,
they've ceded all this territory to Trump. Trump gets to go to the imams in Michigan and say, look, we're all going to work together to bring peace to the Middle East, which of course doesn't have any relation to an actual policy program, because Trump is saying, let's pulverize Gaza and Lebanon even harder and then allow Israel to declare victory. He says he has a secret plan to force Putin, I guess, to capitulate in Ukraine, similar to Richard Nixon saying he had a secret plan to end the war in Vietnam with victory. Then he extended and prolonged and expanded the war in Vietnam for 4 years before finally going along with the peace deal that had been available when he got into office, because nobody challenges Trump on the real issues to which he's actually vulnerable. And the Democrats are a huge culprit in that. And yeah, there's going to be a lot of blame to go around if Trump does win, but the Democrats, the canard of the Democratic campaign will certainly be among them. But also have to say the alternative media, for in large part converting into a cheerleading squad for Donald Trump. I'm generalizing, yes, but like Russell Brand going to the Maha rally and reciting the Lord's Prayer with Jordan Peterson, because I guess the restoration of Republican executive power is going to bring salvation to America. I mean, this stuff is ludicrous, and nobody really called it out ever, despite like how painfully idiotic it was. I mean,
I was on that same stage a day before, and I called it out.
Well, good for you. Not you. You're, as usual, Max. You're noble, but not enough people do what you do.
Well, thank you. I mean, Jordan Peterson. He's not even American either. Is he Canadian?
Yeah, he's Canadian.
Remember he did that crazy Israel event with Ben Shapiro. He's like, we need Jerusalem. We need to have Jerusalem in our world. We need Israel and Netanyahu. And he's like, pray, Lord. He's wearing like that like question marks or something on his shirt, like that guy from the infomercials.
Yeah, selling like reverse mortgages.
Yeah, I can't see Kamala denouncing the Itamar Ben-Gvir vaunted endorsement, though. Like, Donald Trump was endorsed by an actual Judeo-Nazi. Like, I can't see her doing that. But
they let Trump say, I brought peace to the Middle East because he set up these
Abraham Accords,
which
they continued,
were arms deals and annexation deals masquerading as peace deals. But nobody rebuts Trump on that, because the Democrats, had signed on to the Abraham Accords, and Biden wanted to expand it to Saudi Arabia. Trump says he wants to do the same thing. So the U.S., lo and behold, is going to get even more entangled in the Middle East, because you have to exchange security guarantees quote unquote, to Saudi Arabia in order, as a bribe, essentially, for them to normalize relations with Israel. So it's just a giant disaster.
They even criticized, the Democrats even criticized Trump for not bombing Iran after Iran shot down a drone. And there was an incident where Trump actually held back on a counterstrike after he was told it would kill people. And Democrats in their platform at the convention, they criticized him for that. Like Tim Walz was saying that talking point, that like Trump was like soft on her, even though of course, and they opened themselves up to that by returning to office and not going under Biden and not going back to their own Iran deal, which Trump had
Walz
killed.
has turned out to be a real liability too, just on the vibe scale, and very similar, like in a very similar way to Tim Kaine. Do you remember him playing harmonica with for like in the Hillary campaign, and what a drag he was on her? I mean, that was like, it was like John Popper overdosing. But anyway, Michael, we're wasting Ali Abunima's time here in the green room. But thank you for being so generous with yours as you're out there in a battleground state on the front lines of the most important election of our lifetime.
I'm battling on behalf of truth and justice here in Pennsylvania. So we shall see.
And yeah, I loved your guest hosting of Glenn Greenwald. So hope to.
He didn't, but that's okay.
All right.
Even though you wasted way too much time tonight, Michael, litigating the RFK thing.
I had to get it off my chest.
That's like on our stream.
Yeah, but whatever. But we still appreciate you coming here, and it's great to have someone actually who's on the ground talking to voters. And thank you, Michael. Honestly, you've done great work throughout this campaign, and staying true to your roots as a contrarian. You've certainly shown your bona fides there by pissing off any last MAGA follower who you still have. And so
whatever work I've done has been all for naught. So I guess I should re-examine my life priorities at this point.
You won't. No, Michael Tracy, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Michael.
All right.
We're back on the Jordan Peterson show, and we're talking about the war on boys. There is a war on boys in America, and we need to parenthetically interject by interrogating the hermeneutics of what could be the word war, which in reverse is raw.
Pretty good. Pretty impressive. Pretty good, Jordan Peterson.
I'm from Canada.
All right.
Thank you, Aaron. Gabor Mate is a communist.
Let's bring in Ali Abunimah after that moment of levity.
Yes.
Ali Abunimah is the founder of Electronic Intifada, which is really like one of the first alternative media publications, online alternative media publications, period. Like overall, the first on Palestine. Am I right, Ali? You're kind of like here.
We may be one of the first, but I think we're certainly the longest continuing publication. Makes me feel old, Max.
Well, Ali, I mean, to your credit, unlike a lot of the other sites that started around your time, I mean, you've kept your audience, and in fact, you've grown. I think of, remember ZNet? Remember ZNet? Yeah. ZNet? You know, it just kind of lost its momentum, but you guys have stayed strong and have never been more vital than over this last year of genocide. Imagine our understanding of the genocide without Electronic Intifada. It would just be, we'd all be at a loss. So anyway.
Well, thank you. I mean, let me just say, I'm very proud of my colleagues. I work with some of the best people in the world, and we're particularly proud to be publishing writers in Gaza every day, and that's a thing I think we're doing for history. And so if anyone doesn't know the Electronic Intifada, I think many of your audience do, because I think many of the people who watch the Grayzone also watch our live stream, and so most are familiar. But if you don't, check out the Electronic Intifada, if nothing else, to read the articles every day from people in Gaza, because you're going to read the stuff that is not going to make it into the New York Times.
Definitely.
And then you're going to read about the stuff that makes it into the New York Times that is completely false and untrue. Of course, I mean, the Grayzone, along with the Electronic Intifada and Mondo Weiss and a couple of other independent journalists and outlets, I mean, over the last year, I think we were able to really destroy the Israeli narrative about October 7th, the lies about October 7th, the lies such as the mass rapes, which Kamala Harris has been promoting aggressively and incessantly throughout this campaign to justify her genocide, the genocide that she and Joe Biden are perpetrating right now while everyone is focused on the election.
Yeah, isn't it fair to say that Doug Emhoff, her partner or husband and AIPAC handler, has been credibly accused by more live women of abusing them than Hamas was on October 7th?
Well, I haven't followed the allegations about Doug Emhoff, but what I can say to date, now more than a year after October 7th, is that there is still not a single credible allegation of a single rape taking place on October 7th, 2023. Not one.
Not one. Date. Yeah, so the New York Times sent Anat Schwartz, who was later fired for pro-genocide tweets, to every rape crisis center in Israel to find the victims, and she couldn't find one. But I guess Katha Pollitt told us that they're all dead, so that's why there are no testimonies of anyone alive.
Yeah, but when you say that, the reply is always, well, why do you refuse to listen to the victims? We need to listen to the victims. Well, I would be very eager to listen to the victims if any would come forward. And yeah, it's just a huge lie. And it's a lie that has been kept alive because people like Kamala Harris and Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton have continued to repeat it incessantly throughout this campaign. Actually, I don't know if Bill Clinton did. I think that might be an area he wants to steer clear of. But certainly Kamala Harris and Hillary Clinton have been very aggressive about it.
Bill Clinton more comfortable sticking to like 2,000 years ago. And
well,
that
and also,
Hillary in Samaria.
Yeah, Bill Clinton's speech in Dearborn, was it in Dearborn? It was in Michigan.
It was in Detroit.
In Detroit. Yeah, his Kahanist speech, where he's now adopted the terminology of calling the West Bank Judea and Samaria, and the lies about Palestinians being used as human shields in order to justify the slaughter. I mean, one of my colleagues just told me, I didn't see the figure myself, that third-party candidates are polling at 3% right now in Michigan, which is pretty high. If
that is high.
Yeah, and Bill Clinton may be to thank for that.
Well, yeah, it backfired. Kamala put forward the mass rape hoax also in Detroit. It's almost like, and said that the greatest crime was October 7th. It's greater than genocide. It's like they're trying to provoke voters. They're stepping in their faces, or they don't even know that there is an Arab American bloc that's outraged about this. But since you brought up the New York Times, Ali, I mean, we should talk about this. It's not campaign related, but we don't have you on every day, and you helped destroy this narrative. What is it? Joe Kahn from the New York Times was the publisher, had a meeting with top journalists. This is Semaphore, and it was an uncomfortable meeting where he was grilled about various issues, and it came up, the letter by tenured journalism professors calling for an independent review of the Times story on Hamas fighters reportedly raping Israelis during last year's attack. And I don't think that letter from the journalism professors would have come out without our combined output. So to the end of this discussion, Khan, who has been linked to the Israel lobby through his own contributions, said, "I'm not confident that every word in any story is 100% accurate. We do our best to make sure when we publish any piece of journalism that any single word is 100% accurate. I'm confident that that story was accurate and worth publishing in the New York Times." Yes. So all stories aren't 100% true, but he's confident it's true. But he's not going to tell us how it's true. He just feels confident.
Truthiness. It wasn't that the joke back when Colbert was making fun of what he became. He used to talk about truthiness.
Oh, yeah.
This was in the George W. Bush era, that things aren't true, but they're like truthy. And that's what this is. I mean, it's shocking. I mean, that story was not 100% true. It was 100% false. I mean, any of the claims left in that Jeffrey Gettleman story, what was it called? Screams Without Words. No, I don't think any part of it survived. And it's really interesting because, I mean, we're going over sort of well-trodden territory, but again, we haven't had a chance to really talk about it. There was, of course, all the mass rape claims that started soon after October 10th. Then they started to unravel. And then the New York Times came in with this heavyweight story from Jeffrey Gettleman. And this was at the end of December. And that revived the whole thing. And everyone, you know, the pro-Israel people could breathe a sigh of relief and say, okay, now the New York Times has, you know, put in months of report. I don't know what Jeffrey Gettleman and company did for months, 2 months, they said. So finally, we can say this is true. And then the story fell apart piece by piece by piece till there was nothing left. And then what's interesting is that you had Facebook billionaire Sheryl Sandberg, who did that film, which came out, was it in March or April? And it was called Screams Before Silence. So notice Screams Without Words and then Screams Before Silence. And then it was interesting. That was interesting because it contained a whole bunch of new claims that were completely, just totally transparently false. And we showed that in our reporting of the Electronic Intifada. But what was interesting is that that film did not repeat some of the key claims made by Jeffrey Gettleman. And so what that tells you is that even like a shameless pro-Israel propagandist like Sheryl Sandberg could not put her name behind the lies that Khan, the New York Times publisher, is still standing by. Even Sheryl Sandberg couldn't. And then, just to bring this up to date, a couple of weeks ago, the BBC ran, well, let me just say, the Sheryl Sandberg film contained this witness, so-called witness, called Rami Davidian, this Israeli liar. We showed how he's just like a total liar, who claimed to have seen all these victims of rape from the supernova rave in the, you know, the desert. He said there were victims everywhere, lying everywhere. He covered them all up so no one else could see it. Those were his words. So he alone covered up all the evidence that only he witnessed. But this was a central part of the Sheryl Sandberg film, that what characterizes the attack on that supernova festival was the rapes. And they had no other eyewitnesses to that except this one woman who had never before and never since claimed to have witnessed this. But in the Sheryl Sandberg film, she claimed that she was in this caravan trailer and she didn't see the rapes, but because she was hiding inside, but she heard all the rapes around her in, you know, at the supernova rave. She claimed that in the Sheryl Sandberg film. No one else said that, you know, that never appeared anywhere else. It's never been corroborated. But then the BBC broadcast this film, and I think it was like a co-production. It was broadcast, I think, on other channels as well. I didn't watch it, but my colleague Asa Winstanley did. It's called We Will Dance Again.
Yeah.
And it's all focused on the supernova rave, but no rape claims. That's totally disappeared from the narrative. So the point I'm making here is that there's no consistency even in this narrative. Like, they just throw something out. The New York Times puts its imprimatur on it. It gets completely debunked. Even the propagandists know it's debunked and they won't repeat it. And then there's never a point where there's any sort of reckoning or accountability. You just get Khan saying, whatever, it feels true. So
I felt confident.
And it feels true to him because he's internalized this belief in Israeli supremacy, so that whatever they say must be true. It should be treated with like a higher value than any other claim, which normally, especially in journalism, requires evidence, right? That's what journalism is all about.
Like videos of Palestinians actually being raped in Israeli prisons, which they just kind of they bury in the New York Times. They backpaged it.
And meanwhile, there's no images at all, actually, of any sexual violence on October 7th. Nothing. Like,
not
even
one. There's thousands of hours of video and no images at all.
Also heavy surveillance as well. And so he's internalized the belief in Israeli supremacy, and also the belief that these Arabs must be savages, coming to rape our white women. I mean, it's also that too. I mean, like, you have to believe that to be able to be able to still stand by this fraud. You have to have internalized just some deep bigotry, and because how else could you possibly justify to yourself accepting these claims if you're not driven by this racist fantasy of like dark-skinned men raping innocent European women? I mean, like, it's a classic trope that long predates this case.
We see this in every war. They would always say that, like, we hear it in every war. But let me just provide a quick update for everyone, since this is a special during the most important election of our lifetime in history. This is from Primo Radical at 10 p.m. The New York Times gives Trump a 72% chance of winning, with an essentially even chance of him also taking the popular vote, which was unexpected. We're also, there's this blowout in Florida. Joy Reid just had a meltdown and said that Florida went for Trump because it has a extreme right-wing fascist governor. So it's starting to remind me of 2016 when the New York Times ticker kept going deeper and deeper into the red. But we can also remember in 2020 when all the betting houses had Trump all the way up until midnight. And then the late ballots came in, and Joe Biden just suddenly surged to victory, creating the sense that the election had been unfair from the point of view of Trump voters. So anything can happen from this point of view. Ali, I wanted to show you one of Kamala Harris's final statements relating to the war, the genocide in Gaza, and now in Lebanon. And I'll speed it up a little bit, although because it's a little bit lengthy. But I want to get your response to this.
And we are joined today by leaders of the Arab American community, which has deep and proud roots here in Michigan. And I want to say this year has been difficult, given the scale of death and destruction in Gaza, and given the civilian casualties and displacement in Lebanon. It is devastating. And as president, I will do everything in my power to end the war in Gaza.
Loud cheers. They seem to want an end to the war.
Bring home the hostages, end the suffering in Gaza, ensure Israel is secure, and ensure the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, freedom, security, and self-determination.
Okay. Huge cheers there. And it's not just Arab Americans in that building. I mean, the Democratic base overwhelmingly wants, according to every poll this month, an arms embargo on Israel. But Philip Gordon, Kamala's main national security handler, has said that absolutely won't happen. So, what's going on here, Ali? Why is she making those statements in one of her final rallies, appealing directly to Arab and Muslim Americans? And why do you seem to want her to lose?
I think they genuinely realized that they couldn't just ignore this, that it was costing them support, and the usual platitudes were not working in terms of placating people. I don't know if they don't understand the scale of the horror that they are responsible for, and or just that maybe they're so sociopathic that they can't understand how, you know, they lack empathy to understand that people, you know, as John Mearsheimer said, genocide is a red line for me. He won't vote for them. And so what about if your family are being murdered by bombs airlifted 24/7, baby buster bombs airlifted 24/7 by the Democratic Party? Because that's what it is. The Democratic Party is in the White House, and Joe Biden can pick up the phone. He could have done this anytime in the last year to Lloyd Austin, the defense secretary, and say, stop the airlift of bombs. And that's the one thing they will not do. They refuse to do. Yes, they made some sort of token, oh, we delayed a shipment here or there, but they never really stopped the flow of weapons in any meaningful way. And they have refused also the Kamala Harris, Joe Biden State Department deliberately covered up. They falsified a government report that in which experts, State Department experts, had concluded that Israel was deliberately preventing humanitarian aid from reaching Palestinians. And that report would have triggered provisions in US law that make it illegal to transfer weapons to Israel. But they were so committed to this genocide that they falsified the report. There was another report in the Washington Post a few days ago about how the government has something like 500 instances of of Israel using American weapons to commit atrocities, and they're just refusing to investigate them as they're required to do. Those are the lengths Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have gone to ensure that the rate of baby slaughter does not diminish in Gaza. And so why would she make that speech? I think, you know, saying I will do everything in my power as president. I mean, when I first heard that, someone like me, who is hardened, you know, not easily moved. Even I this morning, was it this morning or yesterday morning when I heard that? Time is doing strange things. I thought, I have a responsibility to think about this because the stakes are so high. But then when you listen to it and weigh it against what they're actually doing, she says, I will do everything in my power. But she's, as you said, Max, she's already ruled out the one thing that is in the power of this administration to do, which is to cut off the arms supply. They've been clear they won't do that. The other thing she's doing is running as if she's not the government. She is the government. She is the vice president in an administration that is perpetrating genocide. And she doesn't have to. She's running for president in her own right. She can say, I will change the policy. Right now, I'm not president, but when I'm president, I'm going to put a stop to this. She's not saying that. She's just offering these vague things. And at every opportunity that she has been given to say that Joe Biden's Holocaust policy is not her own, she has affirmed that it's her policy. The only thing she's done is embody the meme. We all remember the meme of the Republicans is a B-52 carpet bombing, the Democrats is a B-52 carpet bombing, but it's got, you know, a rainbow flag and Black Lives Matter painted on the side. She's embodying that by being part of a government perpetrating a Holocaust while going around saying, I feel your pain, I feel your pain, I feel your pain of all the Palestinians that we, the United States government, have been instrumental in helping Israel to exterminate. And so, you said I want her to lose. I believe that genocide is a red line. I mean, there's nothing worse than this. And so to me, it's depraved. It's perverted to say, oh, well, yeah, there's genocide, but what about this? There's no what about when it comes to genocide. And if they get away with this, then what can't they get away with? What's next? Of course, I think the appropriate way to hold them accountable is through a swift and speedy trial and harsh punishment befitting those who are guilty of genocide. Of course, I'm advocating for that to be a fully orderly legal process to bring these genocidal criminals to justice. But we don't have that option. We've seen how corrupt the International Criminal Court is, that took 3 weeks to issue an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin on a completely vague and bizarre charge.
It wasn't even on Bucha. It was on like evacuating Russian-speaking children from the front lines.
Yeah, let's say he's guilty of that. Let's say for the sake of argument, Vladimir Putin did what the International Criminal Court indicted him for. It doesn't hold a matchstick to the Holocaust that Israel has perpetrated. And yet, when the Karim Khan, the prosecutor, requested the arrest warrants, the judges issued them in 3 weeks, 23 days.
Yeah.
Now it's going on 6 months, and there's this unprecedented, unexplained delay in issuing the arrest warrants that Karim Khan requested in May, and now it's November, 6 months, no arrest warrants, no explanation. So in the absence of any kind of real legal system, real justice system, the only form of accountability we have is this election, which is not great, but it's the only form of accountability. And what is so frustrating, I'm clearly not a fan of Donald Trump. I don't have any illusions about Donald Trump. But if we look at objective reality, there is nothing Donald Trump did in 4 years. He did terrible things during those 4 years. Like every president does terrible things. I mean, it was Noam Chomsky who said that if the Nuremberg principles were applied, every president would be, guilty of war crimes at Nuremberg. No question about it. And that's true of Donald Trump. But if we have to compare, nothing Donald Trump did comes even close to either what Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have done and are doing, or what George W. Bush and Dick Cheney did in their illegal aggression, their invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, and their so-called war on terror, the murder, the torture, the black sites. I understand there's a whole generation that has grown up without the direct knowledge and memory of these things. And they're watching now the liberal media whitewash George W. Bush into this cuddly teddy bear figure. But more crucially, Dick Cheney, who was the real mastermind of these atrocities, is fully on board with Kamala Harris. So we really should be calling it the Harris-Cheney ticket, the Harris-Cheney campaign.
But Ali, one point, in terms of Trump's record,
Aaron, before you jump in real quick, we're live with Ali Abunimah from the Electronic Intifada. In about 10 minutes, we'll be joined by a Jagoff nightclub comedian named Jimmy Dore. So definitely stay tuned. Aaron, go ahead.
Well, I mean, just 1 point. Yes, the genocide has happened under Biden and Harris, but the question is, if October 7th had happened under Donald Trump, do you think he would have done anything differently? Do you think he would have put the brakes on the genocide? Personally, I don't. The way you've been talking doesn't sound like it. But I will say though, the one countervailing force is if and this is where Democrats are making the case, I think, that they're better out of office, because perhaps if they were out of office, they wouldn't have let Trump get away with facilitating a year-long genocide. whereas Democrats have enjoyed the support of Republicans, whose only criticism has been that they're not being supportive of Israel enough. But maybe if Democrats were out of office and Trump was still facilitating the genocide, perhaps they'd be a stronger countervailing force out of power than certainly they have been in power. But I just want to say, would we have expected Trump to act any differently than Biden had October 7th happen under his watch?
I mean, I think the safest and likely most true answer is no, he wouldn't have acted differently. But there is a slightly unpredictable element to Donald Trump in that I don't think he, whereas I think Joe Biden has a deep and sincere love for Israel and hatred of the Palestinian people, I think Donald Trump is just a weather vane, and he will do whatever he feels is in his interest at any moment. And that may be fully supporting a genocide. It may not be. The other thing is that Trump doesn't like losers. I mean, he has been a loser, but he's the sort of person who might say, oh, why are we spending? We've given them $23 billion more dollars and they still can't win against a bunch of guys in sandals. I mean, he's unpredictable, but the safest prediction is that he would do the same. But the point is that, you get all these people saying, oh, but Trump will be even worse. And the question is, how will Trump be worse? I mean, it's possible Trump will be just as bad, that's likely. But to say it will be worse is, first of all, to diminish the scale of the Holocaust that has been ongoing for a year. And it's to suggest that the Biden-Harris administration has somehow held back in their support for Israel. And they haven't. They've given Israel everything. I think they've even surprised Israel by not restraining Israel. I think Israel is like sometimes their exit strategy from the quagmires they get themselves into is for the Americans to pull the plug on it. That's what happened when Israel was defeated in Lebanon in 2006. That's what happened with other Israeli massacres in Gaza. The Americans eventually pulled the plug and said enough. And so the Israelis could say, oh, well, we were going to finish the job, but the US told us enough is enough. I think they've been surprised that the Biden administration is like, keep going. We'll do whatever we want. We'll lie we'll lie about humanitarian aid. We'll cover up the atrocities. We'll keep sending the bombs. We'll give you we'll bless every single thing you do. So unless you think Trump has magic powers, the United States is always already helping Israel to the limit of its abilities. Short of dropping atomic bombs on Gaza, which, there are certainly Israeli politicians who've said we'll do that. But actually, Trump is the only one speaking out about the risk of nuclear war, ironically. So, I don't expect him to be better. But this argument that he's necessarily worse is to diminish the scale of the crime that the Democratic Party has committed, a real Holocaust. And I mean, I'll just say that this is important too, because people say, oh, well, what about women's rights? What about this? What about that? I mean, my friend and colleague, Professor Joseph Massad at Columbia University, had a really good article in Middle East Eye this week, pointing out how at election time, even most liberals and leftists in the United States become America firsters. I mean, why are the rights of Americans more important than the rights of the tens of thousands of Palestinian women murdered by the Democratic Party in this Holocaust? Why are there, what about the right of Palestinian women to carry their babies to full term without they or their fetuses being murdered by Israel or starved by Israel or poisoned by Israel? What about their rights? Why are their rights inferior? So I believe that for us in the United States, we lived through 4 years of Trump. Trump is capable of terrible things, but nothing he's going to do to us is as bad as what the Biden administration has done to Palestinians. So we have to be willing to exact a price on leaders who carry out genocides, like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, even if that costs us something, because whatever it costs us is not going to be anything close to what the United States is making the people of Palestine, Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, Syria, Libya, you name it, pay for US imperialism. There has to be a price. They have to pay a price. And if that means that Donald Trump wins, I don't want him to win, but that's I accept that's the logical consequence of the Democrats being punished. Then the fault is with the Democratic Party, which allowed this genocide to continue and its leaders. And the fault is with their supporters who have spent the last few months berating and attacking and bullying Palestinian Americans and Arab Americans into by saying, you have to vote for the people who are murdering your family, your friends, your people. And if you don't, then we're going to, just have Schadenfreude while Trump does worse to you.
Yeah, and the problem
it's just sick.
Yeah, and the problem I have is people like AOC, rather than, they recognized, belatedly that this was a genocide. AOC did. She called it a genocide. Rather than use her platform, like along with Bernie Sanders, to pressure Kamala Harris to adopt a sensible policy, she covered up for Kamala Harris and said that Kamala Harris is working tirelessly for a ceasefire. And similar, Kamala Harris, even though Joe Biden was thrown under the bus to, make way for her, that would have been a great opportunity for her to break from him where he was getting it wrong, especially on a genocide. She could have. And the argument from her supporters was that no, a vice president can't, break from a sitting president. Yes, they can. Al Gore in 2000, when he needed Florida, he criticized the U.S. government's handling of the Elian Gonzalez case, that Cuban boy who was, taken from his family in Florida, his anti-Castro family in Florida, to reunite with his, pro-Castro family back in Cuba. And Al Gore, wanting that Florida vote, he criticized that decision. And I remember the President Clinton's spokesperson said, well, they're going to be, it's okay. There are going to be disagreements between the president and the vice president. So Kamala Harris could have taken that same tack here and appealed to people, especially in Michigan, which she needed, but she didn't, because the imperative of standing with Israel was just too strong. And you're right, that very well may cost her the election if Michigan ends up deciding this race.
And part of just one thing that's important, back to that speech she gave that you showed the clip, Max. I think part of it is not just I'm sure they would want to convince Arab American voters or others who are for whom genocide is a red line, but I think it's also about reassuring liberals who are desperate to vote for Kamala but want to have a clean conscience so they can say to their friends and their families and their associates, oh, but look, she promised to do everything in her power. And I think it's the same with AOC. She's there to enable so-called progressives, self-described progressives, to feel good about voting for Kamala Harris. So it's just, sheepdogging. And Bernie Sanders has done the same. And I just think you have to draw a line. I mean, if so many Palestinians and Arab Americans and Muslims who would be among the first to suffer the depredations of a Trump administration, if liberals are to be believed about, what he's willing to do, if they're willing to say, we can take it, then why aren't, so many privileged people, the coastal liberals or whatever, why aren't they willing to pay even the slightest price? And they, it's like for this past year, they've been critical, they've been supporting Palestine. But then at election time, it's like they revert back to Democratic Party loyalists. And so the Democratic Party never has to fear paying any price for its crimes. And that has to stop. Is it going to be easier next time round?
Yeah.
If not now, when?
Yeah, rich liberal women are wearing Handmaid's Tale costumes to the polls, and that's become one of their memes. But for a lot of Palestinian Americans with family in Gaza, there would be a more appropriate thing to wear to dramatize what the reality they're in, and not a hypothetical situation about a future Christian theocracy in America, but the current reality under a liberal, socially progressive government, which is they would wear funeral shrouds to dramatize the situation their families are in. This is what I was raised to oppose in a Jewish home, learning about the Holocaust. It resonates with me in such a powerful, visceral way that there's no way that I can possibly go along with even the strategic case for Kamala on any level, because there has to be tag mahir, there has to be a price tag, as the Israelis would say, for this. Otherwise, they'll just step on our face and say, you lost. We have a mandate to continue this, and you don't matter as a voting bloc. We beat you. We beat Jill Stein. You're never going to matter again. And we're just going to keep going. So,
and just one more thing,
and one before you, and just tie on to your one more thing, because I want to pass the baton in about 3 minutes to the next guest, 3 to 5 minutes or so. But the uncommitted movement, you've been a harsh critic of them from the beginning. I think you called it out from the beginning. You called it correctly from their sit-in protests, which I watched in person, and now to this current moment, we see they were on the take from a Democratic PAC. They had basically been compromised. So fit that into.
It's disappointing, but not surprising. I mean, this story that Middle East Eye broke about the uncommitted movement taking $400,000, more than $400,000 from a Democratic aligned PAC that forbids recipients of its funds from endorsing anyone but Democratic candidates. I mean, my first question is, what do you do with $400,000? Like, if you're supposedly, what are they doing with that money? And they put out
salaries.
I mean, that, which to me is crazy, that kind of money is going to a so-called grassroots movement to do what? And then they put out this statement, which is so disingenuous, where it says, I'll just read the first sentence. They say, today, Middle East Eye, they put this out yesterday. Today, Middle East Eye ran a story about support uncommitted received from the Movement Voter Project. The story contains unfounded and absurd claims suggesting that Uncommitted made a secret agreement with the Democratic Party to not endorse a third-party candidate in the general election. That is just so disingenuous, because that is not what the Middle East Eye story says at all. It doesn't say that they made a secret agreement. What it says, and what the uncommitted movement has not disputed, is that they took $400,000 from a PAC that forbids its funding recipients from endorsing third-party candidates. And in fact, the uncommitted movement refused to endorse a third-party candidate. And according to some disaffected and disgruntled staffers or volunteers, this explains why they didn't endorse a third-party candidate. It doesn't say anything about a secret agreement. So again, it just, to me, it shows the disingenuousness and how this was really all, in a way, it may have started off as something sincere. I don't know. I had some doubts, and other people had doubts from the beginning, but it certainly turned into sort of another sheepdogging operation for the Democratic Party. But it's interesting to me, the strength of feeling among Palestinian Americans, Arab Americans, Muslim Americans who are not having it. They're just saying enough is enough. And I'm sure some will vote Democrat. Some are even saying they'll vote Republican. But I think a lot are going to vote third party or stay home.
Okay. That seems to be what's happening. That does seem to be what's taking place.
And just the one point I wanted to make, Max, before you let me go, is that there's this whole narrative. I saw someone tweeted this yesterday, and it really resonated with me. And I'm sorry if I forget their name, but I did retweet them on my timeline. Who said that, and this is true, you see this, they're getting ready to blame Arab Americans and Muslim Americans and black men. There's this whole disgusting discourse, Barack Obama going out as usual and trashing and scolding and blaming black men. They're getting ready, if Kamala loses, to blame all the most marginalized people for her loss. And no one ever mentions the fact, maybe because it's so well known to everyone, that a solid majority of white people have voted Republican in every presidential election going back to at least the 1960s. And that remains true. The majority of white people vote for Donald Trump. But somehow it's Arab Americans and Muslim Americans and black men who are supposedly too misogynist to vote for a black woman who are to blame for Kamala's difficulties. Having said that, if she loses, and if Michigan or other places where Arab and Muslim Americans played a decisive role in that, I'm going to say great. And I'm going to wear that proudly and say, that's what happens when you do genocide to us. The tens of millions of dollars of AIPAC money to Democratic candidates and Democratic committees and Zionist money and Haim Saban money couldn't save you. And Arab Americans and Muslim Americans took you down. And that'll be something to be proud of, because that would be an historic moment of accountability, rare moment of accountability in this country if it happens.
Could not have said it better. Which is, I guess, why I invited you on. And we should definitely have you back for a wrap up after the election. I definitely don't want to cut you off, but I want to be out of here by 11, just for my own. Because I run low on energy eventually. But that was a fantastic intervention, Ali Abunimah from Electronic Intifada. Everyone, if you're not following that, and especially their accounts from Gaza, which are searing, check out Electronic Intifada and their live streams. Ali, thanks a lot for joining us. And
thank you both.
I hope your prediction comes true.
All right, thanks. Good night.
All right. Well, some quick results, and then we'll bring in our next guest. The New York Times needle keeps moving in Trump's direction, is now over 80%. Looks almost certain that Trump has won Georgia and North Carolina. And Arizona, Wisconsin, and Michigan are now leaning to Trump.
And Iowa, remember a few days ago when that poll came out where Iowa was turning to Democrats? Well, that turned out to not be the case, because it looks like Trump has won Iowa as well. And that will fuel speculation amongst Trump supporters that whoever put out that Iowa poll was just trying to galvanize the Democratic vote, because it looks like Trump is running away with Iowa, or certainly has a strong lead.
May have caused complacency there. Anyway, Jimmy, I see you yawning. Sorry to keep you waiting. we got you mid-yawn. I think you're muted.
You're muted, Jimmy.
You're still muted.
We don't have you.
One second.
Well, all right, Jimmy's going to call his technical person. We'll come back to Jimmy shortly.
Back in.
Yeah.
Well, Jimmy's on the phone right now, and I'm sure it won't be hard for him to fix his mic. But this, it looks really clear that the Cheneys have put Kamala Harris over the top. I mean, what a brilliant strategy there to really increase. Don't you understand that what Bill Clinton did is the way to victory? You campaign left, and then you govern right.
Yeah, it's not what they did. I mean,
you don't jive and shuck. You do the other way around.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. They really made Liz Cheney like a centerpiece of their campaign. It's who were they going for? Like what mythical voter in their eyes and their focus groups did they see as that appealing to? They already had all the people who care about January 6th and who, support the Ukraine proxy war, and who love Dick Cheney. Like that was already in the bag for them. And it's not a big constituency, but yeah, it's looking again, as you mentioned earlier in 2020, the needle also was in Trump's direction on the New York Times side. And then of course, Biden ended up winning. So you never know, but right now it's not looking good for the Democrats.
Yeah, I'm not following it county to county in Michigan. It would be interesting to see what numbers are coming out of Dearborn. But when I checked before, Michigan was at 22%, and Trump was down by 1.5 points, and now he's up by 0.6 points. So Michigan's trending Trump. Arizona, that Trump just went up by 1 full point in Michigan, so it's trending Trump. If Michigan and Wisconsin go, the blue wall has collapsed. And Arizona, I mean, I think that's pretty much a wrap. The polls are still open in Nevada. But Kamala hasn't been polling that well there. So it's just not looking very good for her. And the campaign that she ran was extremely boring, technically proficient, too many ads. She herself came to the nomination through an obvious coup, which the corporate media ran by taking out Biden, basically assassinating Biden. And I think Jimmy, give us a thumbs up if you can, when your audio is working. See Jimmy getting in his chair.
I think he's still working on it.
But I just never saw how this was a wise move. They probably should have. I don't know if it would have been possible to replace her, but I think there would have been no question a Gavin Newsom candidacy would have been stronger, running left and then preparing to govern as a right-wing Democratic neoliberal, as they always do.
Yeah, I mean, I think Trump really is, in my opinion, a pretty unpleasant person, right? With a long rap sheet of like harassing women. I mean, of
Can you hear me now?
Going on.
Yeah,
I can't hear them now.
You can't hear us?
Hang on.
Yeah.
Hold on 1 minute.
All right. I'll just keep talking.
Well, I could hear them before, but I can't hear them now.
All right, I'm going to mute.
No, I got them. I can hear them.
Yeah, you can hear us?
Good.
Yeah.
All right.
Jimmy, what are you seeing out there? It looks the New York Times is.
It looks like it looks like people are voting. What happened?
Nothing. You sound good.
Okay, good. It looks like people are voting against genocide in Palestine. I'm not kidding. And it looks like people are voting against open borders. If you look at what's happening in Georgia, what happened in Georgia, what happened in Florida, Trump is making amazing inroads with African Americans and Hispanics. And that goes against everything you hear in the corporate media. That goes against everything the Democratic Party tells you, everything that CNN and MSNBC and the New York Times tells you, and the Washington Post. It's 25. I saw an exit poll earlier. I don't know how accurate that is, but it said 25% of black males are voting for Donald Trump in Georgia. That's kind of amazing. And so that's what I see happening. And I wonder how much of this has to do with Bobby Kennedy joining his campaign, because I had pointed out before that when Bobby Kennedy joined his campaign in Glendale, Arizona, and he was speaking to a stadium full of Republican voters, he was talking about ending the billion dollar funded external wars, foreign wars, and investing that money back in the United States, which has been my message for years and years. He's talked about taking on big agra. He talked about cleaning up our water supply. He talked about cleaning up our food supply. He talked about taking on chronic illness, which is at an all-time high. And he's also talking about taking on child obesity. And then he talked about getting the corruption out of our FDA and CDC, which Democrats never talk about. And the interesting thing, because people go, well, do you think Donald Trump's really going to do that? I said, the interesting thing here is that there's a stadium full of Republican voters who are actually cheering for that stuff. And that's the same stuff I cheer for. And that's exactly what the establishment is afraid of, that we realize that our enemy isn't our neighbor. Our enemy isn't a MAGA voter. Our enemy, we have a common enemy, and that is the oligarchy. We don't live in a democracy. Democracy hasn't been on the ballot in my lifetime. What's been on the ballot is more oligarchy. And so that's the thing that's, to me, most amazing, and I think that's what's happening. I think Bobby Kennedy joining him made a big difference. I think Tulsi Gabbard, I think Elon Musk, I think that did make a big difference, because those are all people who were Democrats. And now they're, and so you get Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney, the cretins of the Republican Party. I don't think you would call Bobby Kennedy or Tulsi or Elon. People loved Elon Musk up until he gave people a little less censorship on Twitter, and all of a sudden then the establishment said you got to hate him. And anyway, so that's what I see happening. And now the New York Times is saying it looks like Donald Trump is going to become president. And, you know, I'm of two minds of that. Like, I like that. I like Bobby Kennedy's agenda domestically. Of course, we all oppose their horrible genocide policy in Israel, but we don't know what Donald Trump's actually going to do in Israel. He's a bit of a wild card. So, but we still know what they're going to do in Ukraine. We do know what they're going to do with Russia. We do know what they're going to do with Iran. Donald Trump said we don't want to decapitate Iran. We don't even want to go to war with them. We have a hard time running our own country. So it's clear the lesser of two evil in this election. That's how bad. So the voting the lesser of two evil actually gets you to the point where the party you've been voting as the lesser of two evil is the greater evil. And that's what the Black Agenda Report has been saying. Glenn Ford has been saying. Margaret Kimberly. That's what I've been saying. The Democratic Party is actually the greater evil. And so now it's clear that they're the greater evil, and people are done with it. And so they're done with open borders. Even Dennis Kucinich, who, by the way, was so progressive and lefty liberal that the Democratic Party gerrymandered him out of his own congressional seat. He said on my show, I said, how would you handle the border? He said, we got to shut it down. And I was like, wow, that must really be the answer if Dennis Kucinich is saying that. So I think that the Democratic Party has gotten so odious through the relying on the lesser of two evil votes that they're worse than the Republicans right now. That's where we are, and I think that's where Donald Trump will win.
We should have had Michael Tracy on to debate you.
We should have had who on?
We should have had Michael Tracy on to debate you. We had him earlier. We're presenting all sorts of perspectives here on the election.
I would like to debate Michael Tracy's chest hair.
Well, he would need his enthusiastic consent. And Aaron, you can tag team with me on this, but let me present the Michael Tracy counterpoint, which is that Trump is running a successful. I mean, and I'll offer my own opinion. Trump's running a successful pseudo-populist campaign, and he's presenting himself more as the rebel against the establishment. Kamala Harris has put forward the Harris-Biden administration put forward an extremely draconian bill on the border that no Democrat like it, although Bill Clinton did Operation Gatekeeper, put forward. The Republicans rejected it, I guess, because they wanted Trump to be able to pass it. Trump directed that. But the point is they were pushing a closed border policy, but they can't talk about it because they have to manage their various constituencies. Donald Trump is just more vocal about it. Donald Trump, presents himself as a rebel against the establishment, but he's surrounded by Peter Thiel, Eric Prince. Elon Musk is a billionaire. He definitely prevented all of us from getting banned from Twitter, so I'll acknowledge that. But it's not as though he's not surrounded by Miriam Adelson, the Zionist Israeli Mossad asset who gave him $100 million. It's just that he's done a better job at presenting himself as an alternative to the neoliberal oligarchy, which the Democrats just like fully embrace by parading around the Cheneys. So, Aaron, anything you want to add to that?
Well, I agree with all that. And Jimmy, I don't understand like what you mean by open borders, and especially given that Kamala Harris and the Democrats, they've had draconian border policies, and nobody, whether it's Trump or the Democrats, talks about the issues that cause migrants, causes refugees, which is, in large part the Rome regime change policies and sanctions policies that create migrants. And certainly I don't see the Democrats representing open borders. I'm not even sure like what that means when they're cracking down harshly on immigrant families. That was the whole point. Like they pretended to care about immigrants back when that was advantageous to them under Trump, but then as soon as they came into office, they cracked down on helpless migrants as well. So I don't get what you mean by open borders.
Well, the TPS policy is what everyone's talking about.
Well, maybe you have different information than me, and I would appreciate you educating me on this. But where I've seen is that we've had somewhere between 10 and 20 million illegal immigrants come to this country. And this, again, I agree with you. I, in fact, critiqued J.D. Vance on my show by saying that when he was talking about Haitian immigrants in Ohio, is that what they'll never tell you is the reason why there are Haitian immigrants in Ohio. Why do you think Haitians want to leave Haiti and come to Ohio to have factory jobs? And that's because the United States is imperialism. Why do you think Venezuelans are taking over apartment complexes in Aurora, Colorado? It's because we've sanctioned and then open the borders. We sanctioned the people in Venezuela because we want to make life so miserable for them that they, quote unquote, overthrow their leaders. That's never worked. It's never worked, but we keep doing it. But what does happen is that 7 million Venezuelans leave Venezuela, and a lot of them come to the United States. And I don't know what you talk about. So when I've covered on my show that not only is the border open, and that's everything I've seen from Bobby Kennedy going down there, Elon Musk going down there, even the immigration numbers of illegals coming, and Dick Durbin being on the floor of the Senate saying we need to have this immigration because we can't meet our recruiting goals with the military. Plus, we know there's a little bit of a tightening of the labor market, and unions are starting to flex a little bit of their power, so they got to flood the country with illegal immigrants. And so what they want you to do is they want working people to turn their ire towards more desperate poor people that we created through our foreign policy and sanctions. And I always warn people against that. Like if I was a Venezuelan, I would come here. If I was a Haitian, I would come here. What you should be angry at is the economic hitmen through their politicians creating these conditions that make people come here. So I'm with you on that. But maybe I'm ignorant on the border policy, but I know that somewhere between 10 and 20 illegal immigrants. So when you say that the Democratic Party and
undocumented immigrants, because
it's a mess.
Chuck Schumer used to say that was if you don't call them illegal, that means you're not really serious. That was Chuck Schumer just said a few years ago. So the leader of the Democratic Party used to admonish people for not calling undocumented workers illegals. And he said, if you call them undocumented,
I'm not going to take my cues from Chuck Schumer, but anyway, whatever. If you want to call them illegal, it's fine. I'm not going to quibble, but
I think it is a quibble because I don't have any problem with the undocumented people who come here. But you know who does? The black people in Chicago. I know that they rose up against their own leadership, saying we've been begging for money for our own community, and here you are. You all of a sudden, when there's all these undocumented immigrants here, you find money that comes out of nowhere, and you give them credit cards, and you give them housing, and you make all these. So, and again, this is about divide and conquer. This is getting workers to be angry at even more desperate, poorer people than them. And so anyway, I mean, I don't know how we got off on this tangent.
I mean, let's set the stage for that. And how far back can we look at this? This was one of the top issues. Immigration was one of the top issues. And it wasn't because whatever you think about this issue. And, I consider myself pro-immigrant, and I hate all the xenophobic, nativistic demonization of desperate migrants. I hate it. And I've been on the record about it. But it started really with the JFK Seeds of Peace program, which started to destabilize Mexico in the 60s through USAID. Then it destroyed rural Mexico. So many farmers started to come north. And they were, this was after the mass deportations by Eisenhower of the guest workers in California. They were brought in and used as de facto slave labor in the vineyards in California. And you went from there to the 1990s, where Bill Clinton passes NAFTA. The first article I ever wrote was about the mass kill, the serial femicides in northern Mexico in Ciudad Juarez. And it was a direct result of NAFTA, because you had the rural poor coming from southern Mexico to the border to work in sweatshops, maquiladoras, thanks to the NAFTA policy that also destroyed the Rust Belt, which is now Donald Trump's base. And all these women were just basically anonymous. No one knew who they were. And if anyone wanted to kill them, a lot of it was like cartels. No one would even be able to solve the crime because they didn't know who they were. Then, TPP, CAFTA started emptying out Central America. These are all policies passed by the wing of the Democratic and Republican Party that Donald Trump ran against. Under the George W. Bush administration, there were not very many deportations until the end of his term, when he started coming under pressure from the closed border caucus in Congress, and he did the Smithfield plant raid. Then Obama comes in, and Obama does more deportations than any president in history, but campaigns as pro-immigrant, and does this Si se puede, yes we can campaign, and basically tricks everybody. And then, Donald Trump, says Mexicans are bad hombres. He's playing on divisions. The TPS policy is what we're really looking at right now. And before I talk about that, 2015 was really a pivotal moment when Barack Obama put sanctions on Venezuela's oil exports, which caused mass poverty across Venezuela and started the economic migrant wave to the north, all across Latin America. But then under Biden, when they do TPS, temporary protective status, to give asylum to people, targeting countries where the U.S. wants regime change, specifically Nicaragua, where they want to overthrow the Sandinistas, and Venezuela, where they want to overthrow the socialist-oriented Maduro government. They give these fake asylum, let anyone in with, I go to Venezuela, I go to Nicaragua, people call it parole there, and everybody can come up and get parole, and none of them are fleeing the evil dictator. That's totally fake. And they're coming here and they're being treated as a slave class by not just the oligarchy, but small businesses who want cheaper labor, cheaper construction. Mortgage rates are going up now, even though the Fed is lowering interest rates, because investors are forecasting that construction prices will increase because of mass deportations under Trump, which will require American citizen labor, which will cost more. So it is a real issue, and Trump has played it out in an extremely hateful and xenophobic way, while Kamala and Biden have pushed the harshest border policy of any Democrat, but still pretend to be embracing immigrants and being pro-immigrant and won't even talk about it. But Jimmy's basically, whatever you think about Jimmy's own views, he's right that just Americans who have been economically devastated by free trade are now taking out their frustrations on the fact that there is all this cheap labor coming in, undercutting them, and people are being divided against each other, who are both being oppressed by the oligarchy.
Okay, fair enough. And I guess the one thing I would add, though, is only that Trump played a role in this too, because it was under him where he took the existing Trump sanctions on Venezuela and increased them exponentially by trying to have regime change. And so he played a role in fueling the very migrant that he now demonizes to get elected. That's
Jimmy, let me ask you about a separate issue, though, but it's related, because a lot of people are saying in the exit polls that they the top issue is the state of democracy. And the idiot pundits at MSNBC think that means that they are Democrats. And they may be right, but a lot of people, I think that this is a resonant issue for a lot of people, is the censorship. So many people use social media that online censorship is a resonant issue. And the Democrats have been ferociously pro-censorship. Do you think that, what do people mean when they say democracy in the context of this election? And do you think this is an issue like I do, the First Amendment? And I guess I would also add, Kamala says Trump has an enemies list, but she has a to-do list, but it's pretty obvious they have an enemies list too.
So I don't know. I'd have to do some interviews or read some interviews of people who saying that in the exit polls. I can tell you what I think it means. What I think is that when people say, democracy, and what I've been saying on my show for over a year, which I started saying to Cornel West, is that if you don't think what they're doing to Donald Trump, meaning Russiagate, meaning 2 impeachments. Let's remember they impeached him for pausing a shipment of arms to Ukraine, right? The one thing that you want to vote for him for, they made it illegal. The 92 felony indictments. I tried to impress upon Cornel West that the reason why if they could do this to Donald Trump, a former president, they'll do that to you as soon as you become a bit of a threat to the machine, just like they're doing to the Stop Cop City protesters. They use the exact same RICO statute, the exact same grand jury to indict Donald Trump that they used to indict the Stop Cops. So so that's what I think they mean. And you're right. I bet it is censorship. People know, young people know how you have to say things online to make it past the censors. We're living in what I grew up thinking what Soviet Union was, or what the communist China is. That's what we're living through right now, and I think people do know that. And then they demonize anybody, even like Elon Musk. Elon Musk is also censorious, right? He bends the knee around the world to people, including in the United States. But he's a lot better, he provides a certain amount of more freedom of speech than the other social platforms do. And so for that, just like Donald Trump, the establishment loved Donald Trump my entire life. They gave him his own network television show, and Hollywood gave him Emmy nominations, right? And Oprah Winfrey said she wanted to run for office with him. They all kissed him when he came on The View. The same thing with Elon Musk. Everybody loved Elon Musk because he was fulfilling the agenda of the climate change, and he was creating electric cars. And then as soon as he said, hey, maybe we should have free speech, they're like, no, that guy's bad. Hitler, bad guy, the dictate, all that stuff. Same thing they're doing to Donald Trump. So I think maybe you're right when they say democracy is number one. I don't think it's exactly what MSNBC thinks it is, just because they've repeated it over and over that democracy is on the ballot, which is a lie. Democracy is not on the ballot. What's on the ballot? Kamala Harris did not get one vote to be where she is, right? So what's on the ballot is oligarchy, and that's what's been on the ballot most of my adult life. Oligarchy is on the ballot. And so, yeah, I agree to that. But I wanted to just go back to one point and say, like the Haitians that are in Springfield, Ohio, the big reason why is because of, again, a United States hegemony. Right now, the Biden administration just gave $400 million to a corrupt government in Kenya to send their thugs over to Haiti, because the people of Haiti are starting to come together to go against the puppet government and the oligarchy there. And the United States can't have that. So they just gave $400 to the corrupt government of Kenya to send their hitman goons over to Haiti to squelch that and to break them up. So that's what the Biden-Harris administration is doing right now as they import. So they used to export our good jobs, right, to third world countries and places like China, Bangladesh. Now what they're doing is they're importing workers into our country. And so it's to undermine. And Bernie Sanders, as recent as 2015, used to call that a Koch brothers scheme, having open borders as a Koch brothers scheme, right, to suppress our wages. So that's what I'll have to say about it.
Just one update on the races. It says here that Trump looks like he's going to win Pennsylvania. He's up 3.
It's a wrap. It's a wrap.
And it's over. And it's over.
Yeah. And he's also ahead in Wisconsin. So this is not looking good for Kamala Harris at all.
Libby, can I ask you both a question? Don't you find this astonishing that the fact that Donald Trump, while he just campaigned with Mike Pompeo of all people, which is just mind-blowing, don't you find it, I'm going to have to rethink everything I thought about the deep state, that because obviously they are opposed to Donald Trump's administration and his candidacy, which is why the Hunter laptop, 51 CIA agents and all that stuff. Russiagate was a collusion of CIA, FBI, NSA, and the Clinton and the media. Doesn't it make you have to like, why wouldn't they rig this election? Why would, if this happens, which is what it looks like it's going to happen, why would they allow this to happen? And do you think it's because why do you think?
Well, I don't think they can rig an election, but I do think what they can do is, box a president in so that he can't do anything or he can't deviate from the, establishment consensus. That's what Russiagate was. Like Russiagate, to whatever extent Trump had sincere beliefs about having good relations with Russia, he basically couldn't because he was boxed in by being falsely accused of being a Russian agent. And he was also surrounded by neocons. And that was his choice to appoint them because he's new to Washington. And he's also not like a Hugo Chavez, who Chavez, governs based on the mandate of his people and he gets them involved in a democracy. Trump's not like a Democrat like that. He's not trying to leverage his movement's power to do anything. He's a plutocrat and he just goes with what people want in power. So Russiagate very easily snapped Trump into line on the issue of Russia to the extent he was ever serious about having good ties with Russia. I'm not even sure if he was, but so that's how you manage democracy is you just come up with these scams that have the intended effect. And that's what they did with Russiagate. And that's what they did again with the Hunter Biden laptop, which normalized the playbook where you just attribute anything you don't want or anything that makes your preferred candidate look bad. You just blame Russia for it. And that helped Joe Biden win in 2020. And that helped, things go the way those intelligence officials wanted. So I'm sure if Trump wins again, and to the extent, if he opens up his mouth, if he says the wrong things like he did in Syria, where he said, we're there to steal the oil, or if he orders U.S. troops out of Syria, they'll just ignore him like they did last time. And because he doesn't have any real political conviction and doesn't govern like someone like, say, Chavez would, where Chavez would mobilize his supporters around policies that improve their lives, I think Trump will just fall in line that way, and they won't have to rig elections to accomplish what their goals are.
Well, I agree that the quote unquote deep state or the national security state will be able to find avenues for controlling Trump. And if Trump does anything positive, as he attempted to do with a peace initiative on the Korean Peninsula, uniting Korea and ending that war since 1950, will likely boomerang because of the presence of figures we might not have even heard of right now, but figures like Pompeo. And he lets them in the building again and again and again. But that, having said that, the national security state clearly favored Kamala. And that's, 700 former members of the CIA, DOD, the three-letter agencies openly endorsing her, the presence of the Cheneys. I mean, it was all very clear who they wanted for president. And so this is a repudiation of the quote-unquote deep state and the role that they've played in American foreign policy, something that unfortunately Americans will continue to have very little influence over. It's a repudiation of corporate media. Fox News dropping Tucker Carlson means that they sacrificed their most populist pro-Trump voice, was one of the more anti-war figures within the Trump camp. And Fox News began to resemble more a standard kind of center-right network. So it's a repudiation of corporate media. It is a repudiation of resistance liberalism. This model has completely failed. Resistance liberalism believes in converging with the center-right, the Bush Republicans, and the national security state, having no principles, being Machiavellian, and doing whatever it takes to delegitimize Trump. It completely backfired, I think. The Democrats should have been more progressive. It's a repudiation of what the Democratic Party is by draping its support for neoliberalism and war in woke politics, in which just the average people are sick of it. Whatever you think of it, they want something that just speaks to everyone. I can just feel it when I go out there. So it's a total repudiation, if Donald Trump wins, of the full panoply of the establishment. But Aaron's right. When Donald Trump gets in, there will be ways to control him. One, it would be his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who, I mean, Jared Kushner is not just Abraham Accords, Tel Aviv. He's also Davos through Ivanka. And Elon Musk, I mean, he still wants to chip our brains. So it's unclear what a Trump administration will look like. My prediction is if Trump comes in, he's going to be in the war room the whole time with Bannon, just trying to survive the onslaught of insane attacks. And I do think there are unanswered questions about the assassination attempts. I can't fully point to any clear conspiracy. The second one seemed politically motivated. And one of the saddest person today, whatever Donald Trump does, is Vladimir Zelensky. And Aaron, I want to wrap soon, and I want to hear what Jimmy has to say. But, before we go, I also want to hear what you think about what this means for Ukraine. But Jimmy, those are my thoughts. And yeah, it was too big to rig. If it was a Trump blowout, the only way it could have been kind of tampered with is if the votes were too close. But in this country, you have poll watchers. The Trump people have got their eyes on everything. And it's just not going to be that easy to fix an election by the deep state. So yeah, Jimmy, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm glad to, be proven wrong that the deep state doesn't have that kind of stranglehold over our elections, which I was sure they did. And this is, I think,
block them.
Shows that they don't. So that's good. Do I have high hopes for the Trump administration going forward? Well, he's hinted that he won't. He doesn't want to decapitate Iran. He doesn't want to have even a war with them, or most recently, and that he's going to end the war. Yeah, you're right about Zelensky. So those are all good things. The bad thing is that he wants to bring Elon Musk in to his administration and cut. And what Elon Musk is probably going to want to cut is Social Security and Medicare and all that kind of stuff. He's not going to cut the defense budget because Elon Musk gets money from the defense budget. And let's remember, under Donald Trump's presidency, that while the Democrats were saying he was a traitor to our country and working with Putin, they gave him an extra $132 billion in perpetuity for the rest forever for military spending. $132 billion extra dollars during Donald Trump's presidency got allocated to the war machine, and he didn't oppose it. In fact, he welcomed it. And so, yeah, I mean, it's bad news either way. All I'm saying is that's how bad the Democratic Party has gotten. I've had you talk about people. I've gotten into discussions with people who I've asked, you consider yourself a liberal. How do you not stand with the people of Palestine? How do you not have a red line? And they would, to a person, would come back to me, well, Donald Trump is going to go door to door and kick out immigrants from our country. And then they would say that Donald Trump is anti-trans and Donald Trump is anti-abortion. And I was like, so you're telling me you're really prioritizing immigration status for migrants. You're prioritizing abortion access and trans rights over the literal slaughter of women and children, of the most vulnerable people in the world in Palestine. That sounds to me very self-centered, and that sounds like that what the liberals who voted against Donald Trump, what they're really doing was voting to ease their own mind so they didn't have to see Donald Trump every day. And they don't care if somebody, there's no right. If you can't vote against, as Shama Sawan has said, you got to make them pay a price for funding a genocide. And I agree with that 100%. And if you can't do that, then there is no red line. And that's what 40 years of voting for the lesser of two evil has gotten you. It's gotten you now that you actually literally are propping up and trying to get elected a person committing a genocide and committed to continuing a genocide. And so you're the moral superior of nobody. You can wag the finger at no one else. There's MAGA, Donald Trump, Pompeo. No one is Bolton. There's no one a worse person than you. If you are propping up Kamala Harris at this very moment, that there is no more evil leader. Viktor Orban, Putin. There's no one more evil than Kamala Harris in the world right now, because she is literally funding a genocide. So you tell me, is Viktor Orban funding a genocide? Is Tucker Carlson? Is Bobby Kennedy? No. Who is Kamala Harris?
But Bobby Kennedy supports the genocide, and so does Donald Trump.
But I'm saying he's currently not funding it. Let's let them get in office and see what it is. So Donald Trump says the same thing. People say, well, Donald Trump wouldn't be any better for them. And I'm like, well, if he becomes president and he continues this policy, then we'll deal with that then. But right now you have to deal with Kamala Harris and the Biden administration currently carrying out a genocide, and you cannot reward that with your vote.
Right. Well, and that's the argument that Ali Abunimah made tonight as well, and that will because Kamala Harris refused to do anything to distance herself from Joe Biden, the president facilitating the genocide, that might cost her Michigan and play a big role in what looks like her looming loss tonight to Donald Trump.
I mean, I hope so. Yeah. I really do. I hope, because, they say, well, Donald Trump did a Muslim ban. You guys are bombing Muslims. That's like a joke I've been doing for 4 years in my act. I guess bombing is better than banning. And so now they're being shown at the ballot box that no, bombing is actually worse than banning. And so thank God that someone has to pay a price electorally for committing a genocide.
Well, we'll see. It looks like they will if they lose Michigan, especially where the Arab American vote is decisive.
Don't you think it's crazy, the people who say, well, we have to elect Kamala, she would be better for Palestine, and then remove her left? If you can't get her to disavow a genocide while she needs your vote, don't you think it's crazy that somehow you're going to have some kind of control over her after you give her your vote?
Yeah, I think it's pretty unlikely. But again, the thing is, you look at Donald Trump, and many people see 0% chance because of the people he's surrounded by and the things he says and his record in office. So my point there is the choice was really bleak. You had two pro-genocide candidates.
Bleak.
And, I don't think that voting Trump in is gonna make things any better for Palestine. And
unfortunately.
Yeah.
Well, no one's saying that, but this is a repudiation, and Michigan has gone up 5 points for Trump. It was considered a shocker in 2016 when Donald Trump won Michigan. Consider how many Lebanese Americans live in Michigan who are furious about this. Consider that Donald Trump campaigned in Dearborn at the end, at the precise moment when Kamala Harris was defending Liz Cheney on the tarmac. I mean, it feels like everything has been flipped upside down, but it is a repudiation. And if they want to take a lesson, the Democrats should take a lesson here. There was a red line established by a voting bloc, and they punished them. It does appear to be clear. Now, I could be proven wrong when everything's said and done, and we look at the granular details of what took place in Michigan and beyond, but it really does look like there is a new red line. The red line that the Democrats were running on was abortion. They were telling women to try to run up the vote of women, particularly single women, and say abortion is the main issue. It's the only issue, not the post-birth abortions that the Harris-Biden, Holocaust Harris, genocide Joe Biden administration is administering in the Gaza Strip to tens of thousands of children. And right now there are thousands of children under the rubble who we can't even hear their screams. Rescuers are blocked from even going to the rubble in northern Gaza. And we're not hearing a peep out of Washington right now. So people are furious. And I always would ask liberal women, who support the Democrats, but who have been feminists, pro-choice activists. I'm pro-choice, whatever. There's no dispute about that being a right, like a civil liberty. But I would ask them, they would be sympathetic to what I was saying about Israel-Palestine. And I would say, well, what if a Democratic nominee, maybe like in the future, or Kamala Harris herself, said, I respect the Dobbs decision to send abortion back to the states. Would you still vote for them? And they say, I don't know. I mean, they would never do it. They would never do it. Or they say no. And then I say, well, that's how we feel about this genocide being administered in the Gaza Strip. And they just don't know what to say there. So I think this represents a fundamental change. But of course, the Democrats will probably never learn.
Well, I hope
we don't want to assume that Palestine was a decisive factor across the country.
It's like a macro trend.
Yeah, it very may well be in Michigan, but overall, I mean, I agree with you guys. Like this, the contempt for neoliberal elites because of their condescending attitude toward most people, their refusal to talk about issues that impact people's lives, their embrace of all these obsessions that wasted everyone's time and made the world more dangerous, like Russiagate. I mean, there is widespread dissatisfaction with that, and I think Kamala Harris, just like Hillary Clinton in 2016, is paying the price tonight for just being in lockstep with neocons and neoliberals and not offering enough people much in the way that speaks to their daily lives and their real issues. And maybe Democrats will learn a lesson. Unlike they certainly didn't learn a lesson in 2016 from Hillary Clinton's loss. They even went more to the right. So maybe this time, if this result as it currently looks holds, things will be different.
So that, I guess that my question back to you is that, do you really think that the Democratic Party, which is completely controlled, not by the politicians at the DNC or inside Congress or the White House, it's completely controlled by the war machine and Wall Street and the donor class, 100%. That's who's making the decisions. Those are the people who decided that Joe Biden would not be the nominee, that it would be Kamala Harris. They're the same people who chose her first in 2020, right? So if you remember on Martha's Vineyard, the donor class got together and they coordinated her. That's our candidate. And then she couldn't get a vote and had to drop out before Iowa. So they had to shift to their next most reliable dupe, which has been Joe Biden. He's been a dupe of the war machine, the prison industrial complex, Wall Street, credit card industry, the whole deal. So that's why he became president, not because there was a popular groundswell, but because he was the most reliable dupe. So I don't think the Democratic Party will learn a lesson from that, because that's not about the Democratic Party. It's about the donor class, right? And so the donor class wants what they want. And they're not. So we're going to get more of the same. We're going to get another complete tool of the war machine and Wall Street and big pharma and in 2028 to oppose J.D. Vance. That's what we're going to get. And J.D. Vance, as you pointed out, is also funded by Peter Thiel and all those people. And so this is the world we're living in. And then there isn't a third party that's worth anything. The Green Party has proven over and over that they're completely controlled opposition, infiltrated and completely controlled. They couldn't even get on the New York ballot. LaRouche candidates got on the ballot in New York State. The Green Party couldn't. They've been around for 35 years. So that's just clear.
Well, Jimmy, they would say they face also. I mean, I didn't follow any of this. So
I did.
But they would say
I can tell you about it if you want to know.
Yeah, hold on. They would say they faced all these lawsuits that when they tried to get, that the Democrats put a lot of money into fighting them, into basically suing them in courts off of the ballots, right? That's what they would say.
So the LaRouche Party thought, Diane Sayre faced the same kind of opposition, the same kind of ballot restrictions and goalposts she had to jump over, and she got on the ballot. So I've found people. I've heard from people on the ground in Wisconsin. Who isn't there? The Green Party. Isn't on the ground. So it's just anyway. And I'm not here to beat up on the Green Party. I'm in theory in favor of the Green Party. My problem is that they've been thoroughly infiltrated, if not completely invented by the deep state to be controlled opposition. So that's the
we'll
problem.
Disagree on that, but whatever.
That's the problem.
And I have my own criticisms of them. I just if we could go for another 3 hours, I could lay them out.
Okay.
But we can. I'll talk to you on your show, or we can do this again post-election. I guess let's get your final thoughts. I mean, it looks like there's no path to victory for Kamala Harris. And, if anyone wants to know how I feel about that, just rewind to Ali Abunima's final statement, because
I think that's great.
I think it is richly deserved for them. And how dare they take us for granted? Michigan it keeps trending away from her in ways we've never seen before. And it's obvious that there's a protest vote there. But also, how dare they, again, I don't think Donald Trump is going to reverse any of these trends at all. But it's just, how dare they do so many things that we thought the Democratic Party was not supposed to stand for, like sell off all the jobs of their own constituents, all their blue collar constituents, and then go and say, you better thank a union member. Like that's what Trump's going to be saying. Because they're just so pissed off. You just sent all their jobs away with NAFTA. Then you send the guy out who did it to piss on the heads of Arabs and Muslims and say that Jews have a right to Judea and Samaria because they were there in the Bible a long time ago in the middle of Detroit. I mean, how dare you?
What are they thinking? When I saw Bill Clinton, dude, that's what you're talking about, right? Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
I just was dumb. I was just like, is everybody in the Democratic Party hate Kamala Harris and want to make sure she loses? Is that why Joe Biden called half the country garbage? Is that why Bill Clinton's out there telling you about it was mind blowing to me. And so my final word on that is that thank God finally, the Democratic Party has to pay for their malfeasance. Thank God finally that enough voters woke up to realize that they're voting for their oppressors. And not that the Republican or Donald Trump is not gonna, but finally somebody made them pay a price for that. Thank God. And so what I look forward to is the corporate media spin on all this. And what they're gonna of course blame it on racism. They're already blaming it. I saw on CNN, they already blamed it on sexism, that black men and white men won't vote for a female, which is garbage, 100% garbage. And we know that. And so, I don't know what this means going forward, but, the overwhelming majority of Americans are begging for a third party. They want an independent party. What can one happen? I don't know. The lawfare that's used against them, the way they do to keep them off the ballot, the media is 100% against them always. They try to pretend they're Russian bots and all that stuff. I don't know if there's an electoral strategy going forward to represent workers, represent students, represent anti-war movement. I don't really know if there is one. But I think we need to remember, the important thing is to remember that the MAGA voters are not your enemy. The MAGA voters want most of the same things you do. They want to end the wars, right? They want good jobs. They want healthcare that doesn't bankrupt them. And we all want those things. So they want to clean up our food supply. They want to clean up our water supply. They want to get the corruption out of the FDA and the CDC. They want a lot of the same things that we want. And don't fall for that trick by the oligarchy through their corporate media to make you think that your enemy is your neighbor or your enemy is half the country. I'm just so sick and tired of politicians saying that they want to save the country while they're hating half the country. That's just complete garbage and bullshit. And we have to remember that the MAGA voters are not our enemy. MAGA voters are our neighbors who are hurting under the same oligarchy that we are, and we share a common enemy, and that common enemy is the oligarchy, and that all the identity politics and all the hubbub over immigrant, that is all to take our eye off the ball and have us fight against each other instead of having our eye on our common enemy, which is the establishment and the oligarchy. Let's remember that those same people who fund Donald Trump and fund Kamala Harris all work together behind the scenes, right? They play us against each other. That's the big message I hope everybody carries going forward the next 4 years. Don't let them play us against each other. Let's us come together against them.
And let's remember that when
final words from Jimmy Dore, because we want to move towards wrapping. But Jimmy, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We should talk post-election. There's going to be a lot to unpack, but you have been calling a lot of this for years. So thank you so much for your voice and for joining us tonight at the Grayzone.
Okay, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. I'll straighten you guys out anytime you need it.
All right.
Thanks, Jimmy.
We'll do it again. Peace.
Bye.
Aaron.
Well, just let's remember that when Trump does what he did last time, which is sell out workers, cut taxes for the ultra wealthy, launch regime change wars abroad, sign and just lost starvation sanctions on Venezuela and Cuba and Syria and all that. It's just, I just have no expectations that Trump will govern any differently than he did last time, but I'd love to be proven wrong. And it looks like, Trump's going to get the chance because it's not looking very good for Kamala Harris. And I just want to say, I agree with the sentiment that Democrats deserve to lose. Like, based on all the things that you laid out, Max, spiritually and karmically, politically, they deserve it. But I'm not going to, and I'm not saying anyone's doing this, but I want to be clear-eyed that, Trump was a terrible president, and I don't expect anything better from him when he's in office. And his policies, the Republicans, they're even more beholden to corporate power than I think Democrats are, because Democrats at least have to listen to unions sometimes. And that's why you had Biden appoint some decent people on the National Labor Relations Board. That's why Biden lowered the price of some prescription drugs, not all of them, but some. Whereas I don't expect any of that from Trump, because Trump doesn't have to answer to any kind of actual populist constituency, or at least he didn't last time. Hopefully this time he'll do something differently.
I don't think that we can expect much more, and we will also see the same tactics used by the Democrats against Trump: lawfare, delegitimization, as well as activation of the Democratic Party's street wing to start, and Trump's street wing. They'll be tussling in the streets again. How did that just kind of disappear for the last 4 years? It was interesting. We will see Trump in a more aged state than he was before. And it's very difficult to be president physically and to keep up with the schedule of a president. We saw Joe Biden basically collapse in that role. Donald Trump will be facing internal opposition, or there'll be an internal clash within Trump's camp between the Pompeos and the Jared Kushners and the Tucker Carlson faction that is more interested in restraint, militaristic restraint. J.D. Vance has stated his opposition again to a war with Iran, although he's kind of folded under pressure from the Israel lobby. So there's going to be factional fighting within the Trump administration.
There is more divergence inside the Republican camp on these foreign policy issues than there is in the Democratic camp. Democratic camp, at the margins, there's people against the genocide like Rashida Tlaib. But in the Republican Party, you have actually at a higher level, there's disagreement about, for example, the Ukraine proxy war. So that actually, I agree with you. That will be interesting to see the factional fight there, because I do think actually there will be one, or at least if it was a real party, there would be a factional fight if they cared about actually having genuine debate about the issues.
On Ukraine, there will be an attempt to shut the war down that we might have even seen in a Kamala administration, just because it's becoming too costly in terms of men and material, and it's unpopular now in both parties. When Trump attempts to do it, he'll be accused of defeatism and Russian collusion, which might actually make it harder for him, just as it made it easier for Richard Nixon, the author of the Vietnam War, to go to China and advance the Sino-Soviet split in service of American empire, but also, bringing China in to the fold. On the left, it does appear that the Green Party, Jill Stein, made an impact here, and they did a very wise series of coalition moves, but they're not going to be able to make serious inroads with the American public because of the nature of the American political system, which will destroy or resist any party or figure who is remotely anti-capitalist or not subservient to the financial interests of Wall Street, but also because the left has become so out of touch with the heartbeat of the American worker. And that became clear during COVID. And one of my biggest complaints that I haven't really talked about this campaign is that no one spoke to the pain of the American public that suffered under the COVID event through so many deceptions and socially destructive policies that were carried out by Trump and by Biden. Donald Trump managed to benefit from those who were most upset by it. Most of the opposition was on the right, but Donald Trump was the author of Operation Warp Speed and the CARES Act and the printing of endless money, which set the stage for mass inflation. But there was no one from any of the independent campaigns, and especially from the left, that spoke to it. And Jill Stein was not a member of what I called the lockdown left. I actually asked her in a public talk I did with her at the beginning of her campaign what she thought about this. And she actually had some really valid and trenchant criticisms of the way COVID was handled, but she never made this an issue because of those around her and those in the professional left activist circles that were propelling her campaign. So I think, for an independent candidate to make real inroads in the next election, they're going to have to look to Jill Stein, but they're also going to have to look to people like Ross Perot. They're going to have to look at the messaging that Jimmy Dore is espousing, and they're going to have to move away from some of the more boutique social progressive messaging. That's what I think the Democrats are going to have to do as well if they're going to run a national candidate and not get stomped. Although J.D. Vance, he's going to be a much weaker candidate than Donald Trump if he's going to be the guy in 2028. Ross
Perot's what can they glean from Ross Perot? Because I just remember him being really rich and getting 19%, or something like that, which is
they're probably going to need a rich guy who's anti-war and protectionist, and probably doesn't take all the socially progressive positions. I don't. That's the only way I can see a third party candidate doing well in this country at this point. Or they're going to need to be a celebrity, someone with some kind of name recognition. And the Democrats as well. They're just going to keep running these retail politicians who are cooked up by the corporate wing of the party that nobody actually likes, that isn't able to sit for a 3-hour interview with Joe Rogan and demonstrate real depth and to do jujitsu with a figure like Rogan and win over segments that might not have initially liked them. They're not going to be able to produce that. They need a transcendent figure like Trump who can actually lead a hostile takeover of the party. And that was supposed to be Bernie Sanders, but he played into the harshest critiques of himself as a sheepdog while allowing his foreign policy to be taken over by think tank hacks like Matt Duss. So who's the real Bernie Sanders, who's more youthful, maybe has some swag, understands the language that people speak who are under 30. I have no idea. I see very bleak prospects for the Democrats until Trump completely leaves the scene.
And in history, when those people come along like Dr. King or Fred Hampton, they get killed.
Yeah.
Which is another deterrent. Like when you have like a young, charismatic leader who mobilizes people, who speaks across all these different divides, they get killed. And that's a deterrent in this country, I think, to a real leader. Is like there are real fears about an actual threat to the system, like what happens to them.
Yep. Great point. We'll have more great points in the next stream. I gotta jump off now, and I need a drink, honestly. And not because, for the same reason that millions of Kamala voters will need a drink, but I just need one.
Max, I just wanted to show this. Looks like Kamala Harris will not win the south end of Dearborn, Michigan, an area 90% plus Muslim that Biden won with 88% of the vote 4 years ago. Just a little window into how Kamala Harris is doing in Michigan, where there's a sizable Arab American and Muslim vote.
There you go. And Niraj Wariku is a reporter from, I think, Detroit Free Press, who knows that area very well.
Yeah.
So this is, as I said, a major repudiation. It's not just something that happened because of disinformation. It's because of real information. It's because so many people, including me, I'm not an Arab or Muslim American. I'm just an American Jew who was wrongly propagandized into supporting Israel and turned my back on it, saw So many people like me saw dead bodies and corpses and funeral shrouds on their way to the voting booth today. And that's real. That's the realist information. That's the truth. And people in that district in Dearborn, they voted on the basis of the truth. And that's what we're going to continue to do here, is just bring you the truth. We didn't endorse any candidates. We didn't campaign for anybody.
No, I learned my lesson from last time.
Yeah. Well, we're not in the tank for any candidate. I am just trying to bring a real alternative form of media to the public, because I believe corporate media is what got us where we are. It's why we had such bleak choices in this election. I blame the media more than any candidate or person, and the oligarchy behind them. So the best thing I think we can continue to do here at the Grayzone is to produce the kind of quality investigative journalism we're doing, do these streams, and engage with you all who've turned up tonight in enormous numbers. And one thing I want to ask you all to do before we leave is support one of our team members who was just jailed and abused while reporting from Israel, Palestine. And still, the charges against Jeremy Lafredo are still open. Not that he's going back there, but they carry a maximum penalty of death or life in prison. They tried to accuse him of being an enemy of the state. And we're trying to just build a future here for Jeremy to do more reporting like that in the next year. So you can support him at Spot Fund. Just look up support Jeremy Lafredo's work or Jeremy Lafredo, go to Spot Fund, and help us meet our goal so he can do another year of the kind of consequential reporting he's been doing. Yeah, and Aaron, thanks for spending this historic night with me and with our audience.
Max, thank you. I mean, you put this together at the last minute, and this went way better, honestly, than I expected. And you know, so thank you for doing this, and thanks to everybody for tuning in. We had a big turnout tonight, so thanks to everyone who I guess had nowhere else to go, and so we're happy to welcome you in and to you know, take in the returns with you, and hopefully we made this night a little bit easier to process.
Yeah, now it's time for some MSM meltdowns. All right, everybody. Thanks for supporting, subscribing, anything you can do to help us continue the mission. We'll see you. What is it today? Tuesday?
Yeah.
We'll see you later this week. We'll see how soon we can revisit. But thank you again for your support. Peace, and free Palestine.
Peace.